Hey, welcome back to Omni Wizard. We've got something fire today. What if Harry Potter said Shazam and became the wizarding world's god of lightning? Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, Thunder in the Blood. The summer smelled like cut grass and exhaust fumes and the particular kind of boredom that made Harry Potter want to punch through walls. He'd been back at Privet Drive for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Dudley's thundering footsteps overhead, of Uncle Vernon's purple-faced silences at the dinner table, of Aunt Petunia pretending so hard that Harry didn't exist that she'd actually walked into him twice in the hallway and blamed the wallpaper both times. 3 weeks of no letters from Ron, almost nothing from Hermione, complete radio silence from Dumbledore, and a growing heat behind Harry's sternum that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't grief, though Cedric was still there every time Harry closed his eyes, blonde hair, vacant stare, kill the spare. No, it wasn't only grief. It was something older than that. Something that had been building since he was 11 years old, and first learned that the wizarding world had decided, without his input, that he belonged to them. He was sitting on the back step with his sneakers untied, watching Mrs. Number 7 water her roses in the last of the evening light, when Dudley came around the corner of the garden wall with 3 of his friends. Harry didn't move. Oi, Dudley said he'd gotten bigger since Easter somehow, shoulders wide as a doorframe, the casual swagger of someone who'd never once had to be afraid of anything in his life. "What are you doing out here?" Breathing, Harry said. "You should try it sometime," slowly. Dudley's friends, Piers, Malcolm, and a new one Harry didn't recognize who had a shaved head and a neck like a fire hydrant, made sounds that might have been laughs. Dudley's face went the color of a boiled ham. "Think you're funny, don't you?" "I think a lot of things," Harry said, still not moving. "Most of them aren't about you, believe it or not." What happened next was the sort of stupid thing that happened when boys with nothing better to do had an audience. Dudley shoved Harry's shoulder. Not hard enough to knock him off the step, but hard enough to make a point, and Harry stood up slowly, and something in the way he stood must have given Dudley pause because the big boy blinked. Then the cold came. It rolled in from the alley at the end of Wisteria Walk like fog coming off a freezing river, and it wasn't the cold of a summer evening turning over into night. Harry knew this cold. He'd known it since he was 13 years old on a train, sitting in a compartment with a sleeping professor, watching the windows frost over from the inside out. "What the?" Piers said. The street lamps went out. Every single one on Privet Drive all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. "Run," Harry said, and he wasn't talking to Dudley, not really. He was already turning, already moving, his hand going for his wand in the waistband of his jeans because the temperature had dropped another 15 degrees in 4 seconds and the darkness at the end of the alley wasn't just darkness anymore. It was a presence, it was something that breathed wrongly, that moved like a curtain of living cold. Dudley's friends ran. Dudley himself stood frozen the way people freeze when real fear, not the pantomime fear of a schoolyard scuffle, hits them somewhere deep and animal in the chest. "Dudley," Harry grabbed his cousin's arm. "Move now." 2 Dementors came around the corner. They were taller than Harry remembered. Or maybe it was just the alley, the narrowness of it, the way the darkness pooled around them like water finding the lowest point in a room. They drifted rather than walked, robes trailing, faces, if you could call the hollow forward-leaning voids beneath those hoods faces, turned toward the warmth of living people the way sunflowers turn toward light, except there was nothing solar about it, nothing warm. They wanted the warmth gone. They wanted to leave behind only the cold and the empty and the silent. Harry raised his wand. Expecto Patronum. The silver stag erupted from the tip, bright as a camera flash, and both Dementors reeled back, and for a moment, just a moment, the cold retreated and the street lamps flickered like they were thinking about coming back on. The stag charged. One Dementor swept sideways into a garden wall, actually slamming against the brick hard enough that Harry heard something like a sound, like wind escaping a pipe. The other one did something Harry had never seen a Dementor do before. It stopped retreating. It turned its face toward him, that horrible concave nothing of a face, and it reached out a hand, gray, long-fingered, impossibly long, and it grabbed the stag. The Patronus flickered. Stuttered, the silver light dimmed the way a candle dims when someone cups their hands around the flame. Harry poured more of himself into the spell. Every good memory he had, the first time he rode a broom, Ron's face when they won the Quidditch Cup, Hermione laughing at something genuinely funny, the sound of Sirius's voice when he wasn't afraid. He threw all of it forward and the stag blazed back, brighter than before, bright enough that Dudley actually cried out and threw his arm across his eyes. The Dementor let go. Both of them swept backward up over the garden walls up above the roofline, gone into the dark in the way things disappear in nightmares, all at once without diminishment, just gone. Dudley was on the ground. Harry didn't remember him falling. His cousin was sitting in a puddle of something Harry really hoped was just water, arms wrapped around his knees, making sounds that were almost words. Harry's hands were shaking. He looked at his wand, looked at the end of the alley where the Dementors had been. Dementors, he thought in little winging, 2 of them, on a Tuesday evening in July. That was not an accident. He helped Dudley up. He half-dragged him home. Aunt Petunia met them at the door and took one look at Dudley's face, and her own went several interesting shades of white. And Harry said quietly, Dementors, 2 of them. He'll be all right. And Aunt Petunia, for the first and possibly only time in Harry's memory, said nothing at all. He was upstairs in his room, sitting on his bed with his wand still in his hand when the owl arrived. The ministry owl was gray and self-important, and it dropped the letter directly in his lap with the energy of someone who'd been told it was urgent and had really taken that to heart. Harry opened it before the owl had even finished ruffling its feathers. Dear Mr. Potter, you have received an official warning from the improper use of magic office for performing a patronus charm in the presence of a muggle. Further violations will result in the destruction of your wand and expulsion from Hogwarts. Signed, Mafalda Hopkirk. Harry read it twice. He set it down on the bed very carefully, the way you set down something you're considering throwing through a window. Then he picked it up again, folded it, and put it in the pocket of his jeans. He went back downstairs. Uncle Vernon was in the sitting room making sounds about lawyers and Harry's expulsion from school, and what a very good day this was going to turn out to be after all. And Harry stood in the doorway and looked at him and said, I just drove off 2 Dementors. Those are creatures that eat the happy memories out of your mind until there's nothing left but the worst thing that ever happened to you. They were here because someone sent them. The ministry is more worried about me breaking a rule than about why they were sent. I would sit down and be quiet for the rest of the evening if I were you. Uncle Vernon sat down. Harry went back upstairs and lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out if this was how angry felt or if it was something beyond that. It was well past midnight when he got up to get a glass of water. He didn't put on the light. He knew the hallway well enough in the dark. He'd navigated it without a sound since he was big enough to reach the banister, and he was at the top of the stairs, one hand on the newel post, when he felt the ground shift under his feet. Not an earthquake, not even a tremor, more like the ground sighing. Like it had been holding something in for a very long time and had decided just now tonight that this was the moment. Harry looked down. There were letters in the grain of the floorboards. Not visible exactly, more like the wood itself had become slightly translucent, and through it he could see something that went down much further than the foundation of number 4 should have allowed. And in that depth, faint and golden and patient, were symbols he didn't recognize from any class at Hogwarts. His first instinct was to call it a hallucination. His second was to remember that he had grown up in a house that told him he was having nightmares every time something magical happened to him, and he had wasted 6 years second-guessing himself. And look how well that had turned out. He pressed his palm flat against the floor. The stairs opened up. Not dramatically, no grinding of stone, no shafts of golden light, no cinematic rumbling. The stairs just weren't there anymore, and instead there were steps leading down, and they were made of something that looked like black marble but gave slightly under his feet like packed earth, and they were lit by a sourceless warm light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Harry went down. He went down because he was Harry Potter and he had ridden a dragon, had stood in a graveyard while Voldemort came back to life, had faced a basilisk at 12 years old armed with nothing but a sword he found in a hat, and he had long since crossed the threshold of ordinary human self-preservation. The stairs went down further than was architecturally possible, further than the foundations of Privet Drive, further than the pipes and the cables and the compressed London clay beneath every English suburb, and then they leveled out into a chamber. It was vast. It shouldn't have been. They were under a semi-detached house in Surrey, for God's sake, but it was vast in the way that dreams are sometimes vast. The way a space can feel infinite, not because it is, but because something in it demands it. The ceiling was so far up Harry couldn't see it clearly. The walls were covered in carvings that moved, not the animated way paintings moved in the wizarding world, but slowly geologically like continents drifting. At the far end of the chamber was a throne. On the throne sat a man. He was old in the way that mountains are old, not aged, not decrepit, but accumulated, layered, carrying the weight of time in a way that didn't diminish him at all. His hair and beard were white and very long. He wore robes that seemed to be made of a material Harry couldn't quite focus on, something that suggested storm clouds and library shelves and the deep water at the bottom of the ocean all at once. His eyes were dark and very, very awake. Harry Potter, the man said. His voice was not loud. It was simply everywhere, the way thunder is everywhere, not just in your ears but in your sternum. Yeah, Harry said, because what else do you say? Who are you? I have been called many things, the man said. Solomon is the name that matters most tonight. Solomon, Harry walked forward. Wasn't sure he'd consciously decided to, but his feet kept moving and the throne got closer. As in the ancient king, wisdom, the ring, the seals. Solomon's mouth curved. You know your history. I know what Hermione made me read, Harry said. She made me read a lot of things. She is wise, Solomon said. Wisdom is the first gift, the first letter. He gestured with one hand, and in the air between them Harry saw it, a single golden letter burning like a coal, as Harry stopped walking. He was maybe 20 feet from the throne now, close enough to see that the carvings on the walls were not just moving but cycling, showing scenes of something, battles he thought, and storms, and a figure in lightning that resolved every few seconds into a shape that was young and wore glasses. That's meant to be me, Harry said. It has been me, Solomon said. Before that it was others, champions, one at a time down through the ages. Each era chooses its own. He leaned forward slightly in the throne. Your era has been choosing for 15 years, Harry. Since the night a Dark Lord's curse bounced off a baby's forehead and everyone called it a miracle and went back to their lives. And left me with the Dursleys, Harry said, and built a story around you that you did not write, Solomon said, and decided what your life would mean before you were old enough to speak. Harry's jaw tightened. Is this the part where you offer me something? Yes. And what do you want in return? Solomon settled back in the throne. There was something in the way he did it that felt like respect, like a teacher giving a student real credit for asking the right question. Nothing, he said. Nothing at all. This is not a bargain. The power is not borrowed and it cannot be revoked, and no one, not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not the Dark Lord himself, will be able to strip it from you. It is a gift. The question is simply whether you want it. What is it? Harry said. Exactly, Solomon told him. Each letter, each name, each gift. The wisdom of Solomon, magic understood at its roots, intuition that outran training by a century. The strength of Hercules, a body that curses had to fight to reach. The courage of Achilles, not bravery in spite of fear, but the actual absence of it. The quiet of a mind that had simply finished fearing. Zeus's lightning, storm magic, ancient magic, fire from the sky called by voice and will. Atlas's endurance, no fatigue, no depletion, a reservoir of magical power that didn't empty. Mercury's speed, the ability to move so fast the world appeared to slow around him. Harry listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. When Solomon finished, Harry said, "And Voldemort, what about him? Will this be enough?" Harry said. "Not to beat him, I mean, will this be enough to be done? To end it properly once and for all so that nobody else has to be a casualty of something they didn't choose?" Solomon looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it will be more than enough." Harry thought about Cedric. He thought about the graveyard, the twin streams of gold meeting between his wand and Voldemort's, the echoes of the dead coming out of that terrible curse. He thought about the Ministry's letter, sitting in his pocket upstairs, telling him he was in trouble for surviving. He thought about Dumbledore, who had not looked at him once since the third task, who had ordered him back to Surrey and then gone silent, who was running some secret war effort that Harry wasn't allowed to know about, who kept treating him like a piece on a board, a player and a playing piece all at once. He thought about being 11 years old on platform 9 3/4, absolutely certain for the first time in his life that he was going somewhere he actually belonged. He thought about how that had never quite been true and how he was done waiting for it to become true on someone else's schedule. "Okay," Harry said. "You understand that once you say the word, there is no returning to what you were," Solomon said, not a warning, a clarification. "You will still be Harry Potter. You will still feel everything you feel, but you will not be small again, you will not be afraid again. Not of dark lords, not of old men with too many plans, not of governments that confuse authority with rightness. You will be the champion. What you do with that is yours entirely." "I understand," Harry said. "Then say the word." Harry Potter, who had spent 15 years being told what he was and what he was for and where he was allowed to stand, who had fought things most trained adult wizards would have turned from, who had been patient and obedient and careful and grateful and still somehow kept ending up in graveyards, Harry Potter took a breath. Shazam! The lightning didn't fall. It arrived the way sound arrives after the flash, inevitable and sudden at once. It came from everywhere, from the ceiling Harry couldn't see, from the walls, from the carvings that had been cycling toward this moment for however long this chamber had existed, and it went through him. It didn't hurt. That was the thing he would remember later, describing it to no one because he would never quite find the words. It didn't hurt. It was more like cold water when you've been sweating, more like the first breath after being held underwater, more like the feeling of a door swinging open onto a room with more space than you'd imagined. The lightning went through him and it rearranged him. Not violently, not dramatically. It was more like the last few pieces of a jigsaw puzzle finding their places, and suddenly the picture made sense, and the picture had always been meant to be this. When it was done, he was standing in the same chamber and Solomon was still in his throne and nothing visible had changed except that Harry's clothes were slightly singed at the edges and his glasses were gone. He reached up automatically and his face was clear and his vision was sharper than it had ever been in his life. He could see the individual carvings on the far wall without effort. He could see, on Solomon's throne, the faint text engraved in the armrest, "For the one who earns it when the age requires it." "The glasses," Harry said. "Achilles' invulnerability extends to the physical," Solomon said. "Your eyes are as they should be." Harry looked at his hands. They looked like his hands. "I feel the same." "You will feel different when it matters," Solomon said. And then quieter, "Take care of yourself, Harry. Power is not a substitute for people. Remember that." Harry looked up at him. For a moment, Solomon looked less like an ancient king and more like a very old man who had been in a room below the world for too long. And Harry thought, unexpectedly, almost unwillingly, that there was something sad in his eyes. "I'll remember," Harry said. He went back up the stairs. They were stairs again when he reached them. When he stepped into the upstairs hallway of number 4 Privet Drive, the floor was just a floor and the landing was just a landing, and it was almost 2 in the morning. He stood for a moment in the dark. He breathed in. He breathed out. He went to the bathroom and looked at his face in the mirror. Same face. Same green eyes that everyone always said were his mother's. The scar on his forehead lightning bolt shaped, as if even in this the world had been unable to resist being thematically consistent. The same jaw, the same untidy hair that had never once cooperated with a comb. He looked at himself for a long moment. Then he went to his room and lay on his bed and put his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling. And for the first time since Cedric's body had dropped to the ground in that graveyard in April, the tightness in his chest, the constant low-level brace of someone waiting for the next blow to land, was simply not there. He slept without dreaming. In the morning he came downstairs and made himself breakfast, which he did not normally do because the Dursleys generally preferred to act as though his presence in the kitchen was an imposition. He made eggs and toast and tea and set it all on the kitchen table and was halfway through when Uncle Vernon came in and stopped dead in the doorway and stared at him. Harry looked up. "Morning." "You're—" Vernon pointed at Harry's face. "Glasses," Harry said. "Yeah, they're gone. Something happened last night." "Something magical," Harry said, in the tone of voice you use to explain something simple to someone who has asked a very basic question. "Relax, it's not contagious." Vernon's face went through 4 or 5 colors. Harry ate his toast. Eventually, Vernon poured himself a cup of the tea Harry had made, muttered something about appointments, and left the room. It was, Harry reflected, one of the more civilized breakfasts they'd had. The second ministry letter arrived that afternoon. This one wasn't from Hopkirk. It was from Dumbledore, 6 lines, careful and measured, telling Harry to stay at Privet Drive, that arrangements were being made, that the Order was watching the house, and that he should not under any circumstances perform further magic outside of school. Harry read it, folded it, and put it next to the first one. He wrote back, "Dumbledore, I understand. I'll be ready when you send someone." He didn't say he'd comply with the instruction about magic. He just didn't address it. He thought that was fair. The reply from Dumbledore came in 2 hours, which suggested someone had been waiting with an owl. It said again carefully, "Harry, it is important that you remain patient." Harry wrote back, "I am patient. I'm also fine, don't worry." He wasn't being difficult. He genuinely wasn't. He had simply noticed, in the extraordinary clarity that seemed to come with Solomon's wisdom, not a rush of information, more like a pair of very good spectacles applied to thinking itself, that Dumbledore's concern was less about Harry's safety than about Harry's behavior. About whether Harry would do something that couldn't be explained away or managed. He spent the next 3 days doing entirely ordinary things. He cleaned his room, which needed it. He wrote long letters to Ron and Hermione, not mentioning the chamber or Solomon or what had happened, just the Dementor attack and the ministry letters and his genuine frustration, because those were the parts he could talk about and they were real. He helped Aunt Petunia carry groceries in from the car one afternoon without being asked, and she looked at him with an expression he'd never quite seen on her face before, something between suspicion and the beginning of a question she didn't know how to finish. He went running in the mornings. He'd done this occasionally before. It cleared his head, and the Dursleys left him alone when he was outside. But now he went further and faster than he ever had, and he didn't get tired. And he noticed on the 3rd morning that he was running at a pace that should have had his lungs burning and his legs aching and instead felt like walking. He eased off, kept himself to a pace that looked normal, and thought about that. On the 4th day he was sitting on the garden wall reading a book, not a wizarding book. A second-hand novel Aunt Petunia had thrown away that turned out to be about mountaineering and was actually very good, when a boy from down the street kicked his football over the wall by accident and came to get it. The boy was maybe 10, gap-toothed, slightly nervous because everyone on Privet Drive had complicated feelings about the strange teenager at number 4. "Sorry," the boy said. "Didn't mean to hit your wall." "You didn't," Harry said. "I'm on the wall, that's different." He hopped down and picked up the ball and handed it over. The boy looked at him for a moment. "Your eyes are really green," the boy said. "I know," Harry said. Like really green, like a cartoon. I've been told, Harry said. The boy kicked his ball back down the street and Harry watched him go and felt something warm and very simple in the middle of his chest. Not happiness exactly, more like the baseline of it, the hum of it. He'd been so far from it for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without bracing for the next catastrophe. He thought about what Solomon had said, power is not a substitute for people. He thought about Ron and Hermione and Neville and Luna and Ginny, and he thought about the year ahead, and he thought about the Ministry's letters and Dumbledore's careful concern and Voldemort somewhere out there rebuilding and the fact that there was something growing in his chest that tasted like resolve but felt, for the first time in his life, like choice. Not duty, not destiny, not the weight of a prophecy he hadn't been told yet. Choice. He was Harry Potter. He was 15 years old. He was also now something that had no name in any textbook at Hogwarts, something older than the school itself. Something that answered to a word of power that made lightning come like a called dog. And he was ready. 5 days later the order came. It was evening and the sky was threatening rain, the good English summer rain, the kind that smells like wet pavement and grass, the kind that made Privet Drive look slightly less beige than usual, and there was a sound in the alley and then 12 people on broomsticks descended into the back garden with all the subtlety of a brass band. Harry was already at the back door with his trunk beside him and Hedwig's cage in his hand. Moody landed first. His magical eye swiveled to Harry and stopped. The real eye squinted. Something moved in the old Auror's expression that might, in a better lit situation, have been called surprise. Potter, Moody said. Mad-Eye, Harry said. You look different. Moody stumped forward, studying him the way he studied everything with the focused intensity of a man who'd learned that the most dangerous things in the world were the things that look safe. What happened to your glasses? Magical accident, Harry said. All sorted. Moody stared at him with the magical eye for another 5 seconds. The eye, as far as Harry knew, could see through objects, through invisibility cloaks, through most forms of concealment. Whatever it was seeing now made Moody go very still for a moment. Moody said, which was not his usual response to things. The others landed behind him, Lupin, who smiled, Tonks, who tripped over the garden gnome and swore creatively, Kingsley Shacklebolt, who nodded once with the formal gravity of a man who took everything seriously, a few others Harry knew less well. They all had broomsticks and they all had that particular look of people on a mission that had been planned and briefed and planned again. Lupin came forward and put his hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry, you all right? The Dementor attack. I'm fine, Harry said, and he met Lupin's eyes and he knew the werewolf heard something different in those 2 words than he was used to hearing, because Lupin paused and looked at him and some internal calculation shifted in his expression. Yes, Lupin said slowly, I see that. And then ready to go, been ready for days, Harry said. Tonks took his trunk. Harry picked up Hedwig's cage and looked back at number 4, Privet Drive, the beige walls, the tidy garden, the house where he had slept in a cupboard for 10 years and been told he was nothing, and he felt nothing complicated about leaving it. No nostalgia, no unfinished business. Just the clean click of a chapter ending properly. He got on the broomstick they'd brought for him and rose into the air with the rest of them, and London spread out below as they climbed above the cloud cover. The lights of it, amber and orange, the great mess of a city living its ordinary life, and the rain hit them at 300 feet, and Harry tipped his face up into it and felt the cold of it, and felt something in him answer the storm the way iron answers a magnet. The lightning that branched across the sky 2 miles north of them shouldn't have been there. No thunderstorm had been forecast. But it arced brilliant and specific, and Harry felt it in his teeth and in his chest and in the blood moving through his hands on the broomstick handle, and he smiled. Tonks, flying next to him, saw the smile. You look like you're enjoying this, she said, half shouting over the wind. I am, Harry said. Most people don't enjoy flying through a rainstorm. I'm not most people, Harry said, and the lightning answered him again, closer, so close the thunder hit them half a second later, and Tonks yelped and nearly dropped her broom. And Harry laughed, genuinely laughed, the way he hadn't laughed in months, and the sound of it went out into the storm, and the storm seemed for just a moment to laugh back. Moody, flying 15 feet away, heard it too. His magical eye fixed on Harry and stayed there for most of the rest of the flight. Whatever it was seeing, the old Auror kept it to himself. But when they landed in the alley behind Grimmauld Place, Moody pulled him aside for a moment while the others wrestled with the door. Potter, he said quietly, something changed. Harry looked at him. Yes, something big. Yes. Moody was quiet for a moment. He looked up at where the lightning was still flickering at the edge of the sky, several miles off now, wrong for the season and the weather pattern and the general meteorological situation in central London. He looked back at Harry. Good, he said. It was, Harry thought, possibly the most useful thing anyone had said to him all summer. The door to Grimmauld Place swung open and the light and noise and warmth of it came tumbling out, voices, the smell of cooking, the particular chaotic energy of too many people in too small a space. And Harry picked up Hedwig's cage and walked inside and felt, for the first time since he'd stepped off the Hogwarts Express in June, that things were moving in the direction they were supposed to move. He didn't know yet what Umbridge was. He didn't know yet about the educational decrees, or the inquisitorial squad, or the precise shape of the year ahead. He didn't know what Dumbledore's face would look like when they were finally in the same room, and the headmaster looked at him and really understood, what he was looking at. But he walked through the door of 12, Grimmauld Place, into the sound of Ron's voice saying Harry, and Hermione's slightly earlier Harry. That overlapped with it in the way their voices always did when they were both excited, and Ginny was there with a grin that meant she already knew something had changed without knowing what, and Mrs. Weasley was coming from the kitchen smelling of pot roast, and Sirius was at the top of the stairs with his hands in his pockets and his dark eyes scanning Harry with the careful attention of someone who loves a person and is checking whether they're really all right. Harry met Sirius's eyes. Sirius went still. Then something in his face, the permanent haunted quality of it, the Azkaban gray undertow that never fully left him, even on his best days, shifted just slightly toward something lighter. "You look different," Sirius said. "Everyone keeps saying that," Harry said. "Different good," Sirius said. "Different like," he paused, "different like yourself." Harry took the stairs two at a time and they grabbed each other in the hallway the way you grab someone when you're both too old for that sort of thing and do it anyway. And Harry felt the solid reality of his godfather's arm across his shoulders and thought, this is what I'm protecting. This, the people. The laughing and the cooking and the voices. Not the wizarding world's idea of him, not the prophecy, not the symbol, the people. "Come on," Sirius said, pulling back. "Mrs. Weasley's been cooking since Tuesday. I think she's made every food that's ever existed. I think she may have invented new foods. Come eat something." Harry laughed and followed him down the hallway, and behind him on the wall, unnoticed by anyone, one of the old portraits of a black family ancestor opened one painted eye, looked at Harry, and then very slowly closed it again, as if even the preserved dead of this house recognized something in the boy that gave them pause. The storm outside rolled over London, and in the blood of the boy who had said a word in a chamber below the world, something vast and electric and patient settled into its new home and waited, with great contentment, for what came next. Chapter 2. The shape of a storm. Grimmauld Place at night was a different creature than Grimmauld Place in daylight. In daylight it was merely grim, the peeling wallpaper, the mounted elf heads, the general atmosphere of a house that had decided centuries ago to be deeply unpleasant, and had committed to that decision with impressive consistency. But at night, when the gas lamps burned low and the old wood settled and creaked and the portraits muttered in their sleep, it had the quality of something that was still deciding what it wanted to be. Like it was waiting for permission to become something better. Harry didn't mind it. He'd slept in worse. He was at the long kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning, 3 days after arriving, when Hermione came downstairs with her hair in a catastrophic bun and her arms full of parchment and the specific expression she wore when she had been thinking about something so hard she'd forgotten to sleep properly. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. He looked back at her. "Your glasses," she said. "Morning, Hermione. You're not wearing your glasses. Number Harry." She came in and sat down across from him and put her parchment on the table and looked at him with the focused intensity she normally reserved for things she suspected weren't adding up. "Ron said you looked different, and I told him he was imagining things because people don't just look different over summer, but you do actually look different, and it's not just the glasses. You look," she stopped working out the word. "Settled," Harry offered. "I was going to say older," she said, in a non-physical way, like something changed. "Something did," Harry said. "Tell me." So he told her. Not everything, not the specific mechanics of Shazam, not the full inventory of what Solomon had given him, because that felt like the kind of information that needed to exist between him and the moment it became relevant, not something to be catalogued and cross-referenced and written in Hermione's careful handwriting. But he told her about the chamber, the stairs, Solomon, the lightning. She listened without interrupting, which was either a sign of how seriously she was taking it or the greatest act of self-discipline he had ever witnessed. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. "You said yes," she said. "I said yes. Harry, we don't know anything about this Solomon. We don't know what his motivations are, what the source of this power is, what the conditions." "Hermione." Harry said it gently. "Look at me." She looked at him. "Does it feel wrong to you?" he said. "When you look at me, does something feel wrong?" She considered that for a long moment. He watched her work through it, the part of her that catalogued everything and trusted established information fighting with the part of her that was deeply perceptive about people and had been since before she learned her first spell. "No," she finally said. "It doesn't feel wrong. It feels like you more you." She picked up her quill. "I'm going to research it." "Of course you are. Ancient magical patrons, divine champion traditions, etymology of the word Shaz, Hermione. What? Eat something first. She looked at the plate of toast he'd pushed toward her. She took a piece. Ron's going to think it's brilliant, she said, which was less of a statement and more of a preemptive resignation. Ron's going to think it's wicked, Harry said, and the corner of Hermione's mouth twitched. When Ron came down 20 minutes later with his hair sideways and his eyes barely open, Harry told him in 3 sentences. Ron stood in his dressing gown and processed it for about 4 seconds and then said, "So you can throw lightning now?" And when Harry said yes, Ron's entire face reorganized itself into pure delight. "Mate," he said. "Mate." Hermione covered her eyes. "That's roughly what I expected," Harry said. The days at Grimmauld Place had a particular rhythm. Order meetings happened behind closed doors that Mrs. Weasley guarded with the focused aggression of someone who had decided that children did not need to know things. A policy that had the immediate effect of making everyone under 17 want desperately to know things. Harry didn't press it. He found he had more patience than he used to, or maybe more accuracy, a clearer sense of which battles mattered and which were just noise. He sparred with Sirius in the long back room that had been cleared of furniture. Sirius was a brilliant duelist, creative and fast, and he'd been delighted when Harry suggested it on the second morning. What happened in the first session changed the energy of Grimmauld Place more than Harry intended. Sirius cast a stunning spell. Harry moved. Not dodged, moved Mercury quick, a sidestep that took him 3 feet to the left in the time it took the spell to cross half the distance between them, and he raised his wand and cast a disarming charm, and Sirius's wand was in Harry's hand before Sirius had fully processed that he'd missed. Sirius stared at him, then at his own empty hand, then back at Harry. Again, Sirius said. They went for 40 minutes. Sirius tried everything, feints, combination spells, a shield charm that Harry walked through without effort because the willpower behind the shield wasn't enough to match what Harry was putting into the counter. A very creative piece of transfiguration that turned half the floor to ice that Harry crossed without slipping, because his balance had become something uncanny. At the end, Sirius was breathing hard and Harry was not, and Sirius sat down on the floor and looked up at him with an expression that had several layers. "You weren't holding back," Sirius said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Harry said. "That's what you can do now." Without, Sirius gestured. "Without trying," Harry said. "Yeah, pretty much." Sirius was quiet for a moment, and Harry saw him cycling through something complicated, the Godfather impulse warring with the man who'd spent 12 years in Azkaban and come out the other side with a very clear sense of what the world actually was versus what people wanted to believe it was. "Voldemort," Sirius said finally. "That's the plan," Harry said. "Not just Voldemort," Sirius said. "The people around him, the Ministry, all of it." "Harry, the moment people understand what he started again. "Dumbledore is going to want to manage this." "I know," Harry said. "He's very good at managing things." "I know that too," Harry said. He offered his hand to Sirius, who took it and hauled himself up. "I'm not interested in being managed. That's sort of the point." Sirius looked at him for a long time with something in his eyes that was very close to what Harry imagined a proud father might look like if Harry had ever had reliable data on that. "Good," Sirius said, which was exactly what Moody had said in the alley, and Harry thought that maybe the 2 people in his life with the least patience for institutional nonsense had landed, independently, on the same conclusion. The Hogwarts letters came the day before they were meant to leave for King's Cross. Harry's had the usual list of supplies and the head boy and girl announcement, Percy Weasley, which made Ron's face do something interesting. But it also had a short addition at the bottom, in a different typeface, that read, "Please be aware that several new educational decrees have been enacted by the Ministry of Magic in consultation with the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Students are encouraged to familiarize themselves with these decrees. A High Inquisitor has been appointed to Hogwarts effective this September. Further information will be provided at the opening feast." Harry passed it to Hermione without comment. She read it again. "High Inquisitor," she said. "Ministry's putting someone inside the school," Harry said. "Because of Voldemort." "Because of you," Hermione corrected softly. "Because you came back from that graveyard and said Voldemort was back, and the Ministry doesn't want that to be true, so instead they're going to try to control the information inside Hogwarts." Her voice had gone very flat in the way it went flat when she was angry, but had decided that anger wasn't efficient enough for the scale of the problem. "Yeah," Harry said. That's actually quite frightening. If the Ministry can place someone inside Hogwarts who answers to Fudge rather than Dumbledore, then they can control what we're taught," Harry said. "Or try to." "You don't seem worried," she said. "I'm not," Harry said, and the thing was, it wasn't bravado. It wasn't the performance of calm he'd sometimes managed in the past, the front he put up when he was actually scared because being scared in front of people only made them more scared. It was genuine. The idea of a ministry appointee at Hogwarts registered as a problem, the way traffic is a problem, real, worth navigating, not worth being afraid of. Hermione looked at him with that expression again, the recalibrating one. Right, she said. Okay. The train was the same as it always was and completely different in the way that things are different when you're different yourself. Harry sat in their compartment, Ron, Hermione, Neville who'd grown 2 inches and had a new confidence in the set of his shoulders, and Luna Lovegood who arrived 20 minutes into the journey, sat down uninvited and looked directly at Harry with her silver-gray eyes and said, "Oh, something happened to you." "Something did," Harry said. "Something large," Luna said in the tone of someone identifying a species of plant. "Something rather old." She tilted her head. "You smell different, not badly, like a storm." Ron opened his mouth. "Don't," Hermione said. "I wasn't going to. You were going to say something about Raxburts." "I was going to say that's actually quite accurate," Ron said with mild dignity. Luna smiled serenely and took out her copy of the Quibbler, which had a front-page story about something Harry couldn't read from this angle but which appeared to involve the Minister for Magic and a species of creature that Harry suspected Hermione would have opinions about. Neville was looking between all of them with the expression he wore when he knew he'd missed context but was too polite to demand it. "Harry," Neville said, "are you all right?" "More than," Harry said. Neville studied him. Neville had known Harry for 4 years and had a quiet, observational intelligence that people consistently underestimated because he delivered it so undramatically. "Good," Neville said, and gave a single nod, and that was that. They rolled into Hogsmeade Station as the sun was going down in the particular amber way that September sunsets when at Hogwarts, turning everything the color of old gold. And Harry stepped off the train and breathed in the Highland air and felt the castle's magic the way he'd never felt it before, not just the general warmth of it, the background hum of a place where magic had been practiced for 1,000 years, but the specific texture of it. The way Solomon's wisdom let him feel the ley lines running under the grounds and the ancient protective enchantments layered into the stone, and something new at the edges, recent and ministry-flavored, that felt like an intrusion. Someone had been putting spells on Hogwarts this summer. Someone who answered to Cornelius Fudge. Harry filed that away and got into a carriage. The Thestrals were there, of course. They'd always been there. He could see them now, had been able to since the end of last year, since the graveyard, skeletal and dark, with their blind white eyes and their leathery wings and the peculiar dignity of creatures that existed in a register most people couldn't access. He reached out without thinking and laid a hand on the nearest one's neck. It turned its head and looked at him. Then something happened that made Ron, who also couldn't see the Thistral and was therefore watching Harry apparently stroke empty air, go very still. The Thistral dipped its head, a slow, deliberate movement, almost a bow. "Harry," Ron said. "Get in the carriage," Harry said. "Did the invisible horse just carriage Ron?" The great hall was full and lit and loud, and Harry walked in and sat down at the Gryffindor table, and everything was normal for about 4 minutes, which was as long as it took Draco Malfoy to make his entrance. Malfoy had clearly spent the summer deciding that 5th year was the year he was going to be undeniable. The prefect badge was new and worn with pointed prominence. He came into the Great Hall with Crabbe and Goyle and 2 Slytherin 5th years Harry didn't know well, and he was talking loudly enough to be clearly heard 2 tables over, which was the whole point. Of course Potter would be here. Can't have the year without the Ministry's least favorite charity case, can we? Harry didn't look up. He was talking to Neville about something Neville had done over summer involving a particularly difficult Mimbulus Mimbletonia and a containment failure that had apparently turned an entire room at his grandmother's house temporarily purple. "Are you going to?" Ron started. "No," Harry said. "He's saying, I know what he's saying," Harry said pleasantly. "Tell me about the Mimbulus, Neville." Malfoy reached the Slytherin table and settled in, and Harry felt the gray eyes find him across the hall with the particular weight of someone who'd expected a reaction and hadn't gotten one. That bothered Malfoy more than anything else could have. Harry knew this the way he now seemed to know a lot of things, clearly, without effort, as if the information had always been there and he just needed better glasses. The sorting happened. The new first years were sorted. McGonagall was her precise and slightly terrifying self. Harry cheered for every new Gryffindor with genuine warmth, and the first years looked at him with the particular wide-eyed intensity of children who had grown up hearing a story and were now sitting 10 feet from its protagonist. He smiled at them. Not the careful smile he sometimes produced for public consumption, but an actual one. They looked startled and then pleased. And then Dumbledore stood. Harry looked at Dumbledore for the first time since the 3rd task, and he'd been braced for this, or thought he had been, but it was still something, the way the old man's eyes swept the hall and came to Harry and stopped. Just for a moment. The blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles did something complicated that Harry couldn't fully interpret, except that it had the quality of someone looking at a map and finding that the landscape no longer matches. Harry held his gaze steady, calm. Dumbledore looked away first. "Welcome," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried the hall the way it always did, warm and enormous and precise. "Welcome back to another year at Hogwarts. I have several announcements to make before we eat." Ahem. The sound came from the staff table. It was a small sound, deliberate, high-pitched, the kind of sound specifically engineered to interrupt without appearing to interrupt. Harry looked at the staff table and saw, in a chair that had not been there at the end of last year, a woman in robes the color of a poisonous toad. Everything about her was pink. The robes, the cardigan, the little bow in her iron-gray curls, the lipstick, the shade of candy that gives you a stomachache. She had a wide, flat face with large, prominent eyes and a fixed smile that had nothing behind it, the way windows in abandoned houses have no warmth. Dolores Umbridge. Harry hadn't known her name yet. He knew it within 30 seconds because Dumbledore, with impeccable grace, introduced her. Ministry appointment, High Inquisitor, Defense Against the Dark Arts. "I'm sure," Umbridge said, rising from her chair with the satisfied movement of someone who has been planning this moment for weeks, "that you'll all be delighted to hear that the Ministry of Magic has taken a very active interest in the education of young witches and wizards." Her voice was like pink sugar stirred into something acidic. Defense against the dark arts is, of course, a subject of great importance. But it is equally important that students receive only correct and ministry-approved information. Last year's events have demonstrated that certain exaggerations can cause unnecessary alarm. The hall had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. Umbridge smiled out at all of them. "I look forward to a productive year," she sat. The smile stayed fixed on her face like a drawing. Dumbledore smoothly continued his announcements. But Harry was watching Umbridge and doing the math, and the math was extremely clear. She wasn't here to teach defense, she was here to make sure defense wasn't taught. She was here because the Ministry needed Hogwarts to be quiet and cooperative, and above all to stop saying that Voldemort was back. And the best way to do that was to control what information moved through the school. He picked up his fork when the food appeared and ate his dinner and talked to Ron and Hermione and Neville and the twins, who were at the far end of the table and doing something complicated with a set of small objects that kept trying to escape across the table. He was entirely normal through all of it. He didn't look at Umbridge again, but he was thinking. The next morning's Defense Against the Dark Arts class confirmed everything. Umbridge had a textbook defensive magical theory by a man named Wilbert Slinkard that spent 200 pages arguing in increasingly refined ways that the actual casting of defensive spells was both unnecessary and potentially dangerous in the hands of students. She had a syllabus that covered theory, ministry positions on dark creature classification, and the filling out of practice forms. No spells. No practice. No anything that would prepare any of them for a single actual encounter with anything more threatening than a bureaucratic memo. Harry sat in the third row between Ron and Hermione and read through the textbook in 7 minutes, which was how long it took Umbridge to settle her materials. And he got the full picture in those 7 minutes. Not just what the book said, but what it was doing, the subtle framing of it. The way it consistently characterized real defensive magic as something only reckless people needed. The way it wrapped the Ministry's self-interest in the language of student safety. The careful intellectual architecture of a document designed to make passivity feel responsible. It was actually quite impressive, in the way that a well-made trap is impressive. "Miss Granger," Umbridge said, settling into the chair behind her desk with a pink cardigan draped across her shoulders. "Would you begin by reading aloud from Chapter 1, please?" Hermione raised her hand instead. Umbridge blinked. "Yes. I was wondering," Hermione said in the precise, respectful tone she used when she was about to be devastating, "whether we'd be doing any practical work this year, actual spellcasting. The kind of thing that might, for instance, help us defend ourselves against what, Miss Granger?" Umbridge's voice had gone sugary. "Against you know who," Hermione said. The silence that followed was complete. Someone near the back of the room stopped moving their quill. "Now," Umbridge said, and her smile did not change by even 1 millimeter. "That is a very interesting question." She folded her hands on the desk. "The Ministry of Magic assures us that there is absolutely no evidence that he who must not be named has returned. This information has been confirmed by the minister himself, and in a school environment, he's back," Harry said. It was quiet, calm. "Not a challenge, just a correction, the way you correct a mathematical error on a board, patient and precise." Umbridge looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "Voldemort is back," Harry said. "I was there when it happened, I saw it. He killed Cedric Diggory and he came back using my blood and his father's bone and Peter Pettigrew's hand. He touched me. He called his Death Eaters and they came. This is not a rumor or an exaggeration or a misunderstanding. He met her eyes without any particular aggression, just plainly, the way you meet the eyes of someone who has said something incorrect and whom you are giving the opportunity to revise. So when Hermione asks whether we'll be learning to actually defend ourselves, the answer should be yes. Because we need to. The temperature in the room had changed. Everyone was very still, the kind of still that has its own kind of noise, the collective tension of 25 people not breathing quite normally. Umbridge had gone a color that did not go well with her pink cardigan. That, she said in a voice that had lost its sugar and found something harder underneath, is a lie. No, Harry said, it isn't. Ministry-approved information doesn't change what happened, Harry said. I understand why the ministry wants this to be false. It's a very uncomfortable truth, and it has difficult implications for how they've been spending their time and resources. But the ministry's comfort doesn't change the facts. He could feel Hermione next to him wanting to put her hand over her eyes. He could feel Ron next to him trying extremely hard not to smile. He could feel the rest of the class looking at him with expressions ranging from fascinated to terrified. Umbridge looked at him with those large, flat eyes, and her smile had gone from sugar to something that was shaped like a smile but functioned like a door closing. You will receive a detention, Mr. Potter. All right, Harry said. This evening, 5 o'clock. My office, fine, Harry said. And in future, Umbridge said, her voice dropping into the register of someone who is very, very certain of their own authority, I will not tolerate lies in my classroom. Harry picked up his quill and opened his textbook. I'll try not to tell any, he said. The class spent 50 minutes reading Chapter 1 of Slinkard's book. It was the most boring 50 minutes Harry had experienced since a Dursley family trip to a garden center in 1999. He spent it reading chapters 2 through 12. Detention in Umbridge's office, which was so thoroughly pink that Harry felt slightly nauseated upon entering, involved writing lines. The quill she gave him was not a normal quill. He recognized it immediately, the way it needed no ink, the way she smiled when he pressed it to the parchment, the precise kind of smile that had worked out in advance what kind of hurt it was going to cause. I must not tell lies, the quill made him write, and on the back of his hand he knew on ordinary people, on the people Umbridge had done this to before him, it would be carving itself in. He wrote the line, he felt nothing. The back of his hand was unmarked, he wrote it again. I must not tell lies, the parchment took the words in red that looked like blood. His hand was fine, he pressed harder, the quill scratched. His skin was perfectly, completely fine, Achilles's invulnerability. He hadn't thought about it in this context. He felt something that wasn't quite amusement but lived in the same neighborhood. Umbridge glanced at his hand after 20 minutes, then glanced again, the smile flickered just briefly, then restored itself. Right, she said, he wrote, I must not tell lies, his hand was fine, he wrote it for an hour. His hand remained entirely, insultingly fine. When she dismissed him, he stood and put the quill down and looked at his completely unharmed hand. Then he looked at her. Same time tomorrow, he said pleasantly. He walked out. In the corridor, Neville was sitting on a window ledge waiting for him, which Harry hadn't expected. Neville looked up. Harry held out his hand. Neville looked at the back of it, the unmarked, perfectly normal back of it. Dean said it usually, Neville started. I know what it usually does, Harry said. Your hand's fine, Neville said. Yeah, Harry said. Neville sat with that for a moment. Good, he said with quiet, genuine relief. Then Seamus is going to want to know what happened. He's been going back and forth since this morning when you said in class. He's not sure whether to believe you about you-know-who, but he sort of wants to. Tell him to believe whatever makes sense to him, Harry said. I'm not going to convince anyone of anything by arguing. What I'm going to do is be ready, and that'll be obvious eventually. Neville walked with him back toward the common room, and they were quiet in the comfortable way of people who don't need to fill silence. Then Neville said, Harry, the way you were today, in class, not angry, just steady. He paused. I want to be like that. Harry looked at him. You're already getting there, he said. And he meant it. The evidence was in every small thing. The way Neville had grown into his shoulders over summer. The way he'd met Harry's eyes steadily during the train conversation. The way he was here now, in a corridor at 9 at night, making sure his friend was okay. That wasn't the Neville of first year. That wasn't even the Neville of last year. Neville ducked his head slightly and said nothing, but something settled in him that Harry could see. They went upstairs. 3 days later, Harry did the thing. He hadn't planned to do it in front of the whole school. That was genuinely not the intention. The intention had been to use the courtyard for a quiet bit of practice. He'd been exploring the limits of what he could do with careful restraint, testing Mercury's speed in the early mornings when the grounds were empty, working out the parameters of Zeus's lightning in controlled amounts, learning the shape of himself. But it was a Saturday morning, and the courtyard was full because the weather was good and September was doing its best impression of summer. And Harry was there because he'd needed air and hadn't particularly planned around the audience. He was standing by the far wall with a pebble in his hand, which he'd been going to throw at the wall to test something about his own reaction time. And across the courtyard, Draco Malfoy was doing what Malfoy did on Saturday mornings, which was hold court. He had 6 or 7 people around him, a mixture of Slytherins and a couple of Ravenclaws who found proximity to power more important than integrity, and he was talking with the particular volume and confidence of someone who knows they're being watched. Wouldn't be so brave if Dumbledore actually told the truth about what the Ministry's investigation found. Apparently, there's very good evidence that what happened at the end of the tournament was a magical accident, nothing more. Harry threw the pebble at the wall. He threw it fast. Not intentionally fast, he'd misjudged, or maybe he hadn't bothered to misjudge properly, and the pebble hit the stone wall at a speed that cracked it, the stone of the wall cracking, a spider web of fractures spreading from the impact point, small but completely unmistakable. The courtyard went quiet. Harry looked at the wall, then at his own hand, then at the courtyard in general. "Sorry," he said to the wall in a tone that was not very sorry. Malfoy was staring at him. "What was?" "Cedric Diggory died," Harry said, and his voice carried the courtyard with the ease of something that didn't need to strain, didn't need to project, just simply filled the space the way water fills a container. "He was killed by Voldemort in that graveyard. There was no magical accident. The Ministry knows this and is lying about it because the truth is inconvenient, and I understand that's a difficult thing to accept, but it's the truth." He looked at Malfoy. "And I'd appreciate it if people who weren't there didn't construct comfortable alternatives to what actually happened. For Cedric's sake, at minimum." Malfoy's jaw was set, the gray eyes calculating. "You need to be very careful, Potter." "Draco." Harry said the name without heat, without edge, like he was noting a fact. "Think about what you're about to say and whether it's actually worth it." Malfoy stared at him, and something happened on Malfoy's face that Harry found genuinely interesting, not the usual sneer shifting into anger, but something more uncertain. Something that looked very much like a person revising their assessment of a situation they thought they'd understood. Malfoy said nothing. "Right," Harry said. He was turning to go when Malfoy did something stupid. It was the kind of stupid that people do when they've been made to feel small and have an audience and a wand and a hair-trigger pride. He cast a hex. It was a tripping jinx, relatively low-grade, probably meant to make Harry stumble and undercut the moment rather than cause real harm. Harry turned back. He didn't dodge. He didn't cast a counter. He just turned and his hand came up and the hex hit his palm and stopped. Not reflected, it didn't bounce back at Malfoy, it simply stopped in the air against his hand like a fly hitting glass, and then it dissipated, and in its place there was a very faint light that crawled across Harry's knuckles like static. The courtyard made a sound. A collective, involuntary intake of breath. Malfoy had gone the color of new chalk. Harry closed his hand and the light was gone and he turned around and walked away. He heard the courtyard behind him in that particular kind of silence that follows something that will be talked about for a long time. He went inside and went up to his room and sat on his bed and thought for a moment. He hadn't meant to do that. The stopping of the hex, he hadn't consciously done it, had he? His hand had just come up. His body had simply treated the incoming magic as something to be addressed, and had addressed it, and that was that. Achilles, presumably. The invulnerability expressing itself in real time without requiring his deliberate direction. He found he was not troubled by it. He had been mildly concerned in the back of his mind that the things Solomon had given him were things he'd have to carefully, consciously manage every moment of every day. But this suggested otherwise. They were him now, not tools he carried, him. He went down to dinner with Ron and Hermione. The Great Hall had a different texture than usual, he could feel it. The way information moves through a school, the way it moves through water, fast, and in every direction. By the time he sat down at the Gryffindor table, the story had reached every table. He could tell by the eyes. Every year, every house finding him and looking longer than usual and looking away when he looked back, every house except one. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy was looking at his plate with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read, not the usual performance of disdain, something turned inward. "You stopped a hex with your hand," Ron said between mouthfuls of shepherd's pie. "Yeah," Harry said, "just your actual hand, like it was nothing." "It was relatively nothing, yeah." "That's..." Ron put his fork down and picked it back up. "That is so cool, mate, I need you to know that. That is genuinely one of the coolest things I have ever seen, and I grew up in a house full of magic." "Ronald," Hermione said, "what? It is. You're not helping him think through the implications. He doesn't need to think through the implications. The implications are that he can stop hexes with his hand. The implications are brilliant." Harry smiled into his food. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall was watching him with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that only very good expressions are neutral, not blank, but deliberately not showing what lay beneath it. Professor Flitwick appeared to be pretending to talk to Professor Sprout while actually looking at Harry with great focus. Professor Lupin, who was this year's number. Lupin wasn't on the staff. Harry's eyes found the defense table again and found Umbridge, who had been watching him and who, when she met his eyes, smiled her fixed smile. Harry looked at her for a moment, then he went back to his shepherd's pie. She was a problem. But she was a manageable problem, and he was beginning to understand, with the clarity that Solomon's wisdom gave him, exactly how to manage her. Not by fighting the ministry head-on, that was a distraction. By doing what she was here to prevent, teaching. Hermione, he said, keeping his voice low. She turned immediately. You were right about the practical magic thing, Harry said. We need to learn to actually defend ourselves, not just us, everyone. Hermione was already nodding, already ahead of him. I've been thinking about this. We'd need a place, the room of requirement, Harry said. She blinked, then the what? There's a room, Harry said, 7th floor. You walk past a particular section of wall 3 times thinking about what you need, and it gives you a room that contains it. I'm going to talk to Fred and George tomorrow. They know about it. We can use it for practice sessions. Regular ones. Hermione looked at him with that expression again, the recalibrating one. How do you know about this room? I'm not entirely sure, Harry said honestly. I knew, like I remembered something I'd actually read somewhere, except I don't think I actually read it. He paused. Solomon's wisdom, I think it includes access to knowledge I technically don't have, but something does. Hermione considered this. Then she got out her quill and a piece of parchment. We're going to need a sign-up system, she said, and some kind of agreement about keeping it confidential. And a curriculum. We should ask what people need, Harry said. Not assume. She wrote that down. Ron leaned over. Are we starting a secret? Not secret, Harry said. Just not advertised to Umbridge. There's a difference. Ron grinned. Right, not secret, just underground. More like parallel, Harry said. Across the hall at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy picked up his fork and ate his dinner and looked once in Harry's direction, and it wasn't the usual look. It wasn't contempt or challenge or performance. It was the look of someone trying to work out whether the world they grew up in was the world that actually existed. Harry didn't return it, but he noticed it. And at the high table, Dumbledore was doing something he rarely did. He was being completely, entirely still. His hands were folded in front of him, and his shepherd's pie was untouched, and his eyes were on Harry Potter with the expression of a chess player who has looked at the board and understood with sudden clarity that the game has changed, not the pieces. The game. Harry reached for the salt and seasoned his potatoes and talked to Ron about Quidditch tryouts because there would be Quidditch this year and he intended to play and he intended to enjoy it thoroughly. He laughed at something Neville said. He answered Hermione's question about the curriculum with 3 specific ideas she immediately improved upon. He was completely, ordinarily present in his own life. Outside above the castle, the first real storm of autumn was rolling in from the north. The kind that comes off the Atlantic with real intent, big and dark. The kind that makes the castle's flags crack and the lake's surface go rough and copper in the lightning light. Harry felt it the way he felt his own heartbeat. And in Umbridge's office, 3 floors below, the words "I must not tell lies" sat on 50 feet of parchment, unworn by any hand, complete and red and utterly, infuriatingly useless. Chapter 3, What Gods Do Not Fear. The Room of Requirement. When Harry found it for the first time with intention rather than accident, gave them a space the size of a large ballroom. It had high ceilings and a sprung wooden floor and dummies along one wall, not the crude stuffed cloth kind but articulated ones that moved, that stepped and fainted and raised arms in the blocking positions of dueling targets. It had bookshelves along another wall stocked with defense texts that made Umbridge's sling-card volume look like a pamphlet. It had good light, warm and even, from sources Harry couldn't identify. It had in one corner a first aid kit that Hermione immediately inspected and approved of. Brilliant, Ron said, turning slowly in the middle of the floor. It gives you what you need, Harry said. We need this. 22 people showed up to the first meeting. Harry had expected fewer. He'd had Ron and Hermione spread word carefully, not secretly, because he'd meant what he said about that distinction, but selectively to people who'd proven they were serious. Gryffindors mostly, Neville, Ginny, Dean, Seamus, who had come around quietly and without ceremony 2 days after Harry's defense class confrontation, had found Harry in the corridor and said, "I'm sorry about my mum. About what I said at the start of year. I think you're right." Harry had said, "I know," without rancor, and that had been the end of it. The Paddle twins had heard somehow and asked Hermione, and Hermione had said yes because they were both capable and sensible. Luna had simply appeared at the door already knowing about it, which surprised no one. And then there were people Harry hadn't anticipated. Terry Boot and Michael Corner from Ravenclaw, who had clearly done their own thinking and reached their own conclusions about the Ministry's position on Voldemort's return. Zacharias Smith from Hufflepuff, who made it clear from the first moment that he was there because he wanted to learn and was reserving judgment on everything else, which Harry thought was actually a perfectly reasonable position. They stood in a rough circle on the polished floor and Harry stood in the middle of it, and for a moment nobody said anything. So, Harry said, Umbridge isn't teaching us anything that will actually help us stay alive. That's why we're here, not to break rules, though we're presumably breaking some, but because we need to be able to defend ourselves and the only person available to teach us is me. He paused. I'm not going to pretend this isn't strange. I know some of you have questions about what happened in the courtyard last week. You can ask them. Smith raised his hand. What happened in the courtyard last week? I stopped a hex with my hand, Harry said. How? Something happened to me this summer, Harry said. I can't fully explain it in terms of any magic theory you'll find in a textbook, because it isn't that kind of magic. But the short version is that I'm harder to hurt than I was before, I'm faster, and I understand magic better. Those things are useful for what we're doing here. Smith looked skeptical in a way that was at least honest. The ministry says you know who hasn't returned. You say he has. Why should we believe you over the ministry? Because I was there, Harry said. Because I watched him kill someone. Because I stood in that graveyard for an hour while he had a conversation with his Death Eaters about strategy. Because his wand and mine share a core, and when they connected they produced an effect called Priori Incantatem, which ejected echoes of his recent kills in reverse order, and one of them was Cedric Diggory, who I saw die 20 minutes earlier. He said it without heat, without defensiveness. Believe me or don't, but if you're here you've already decided that learning to defend yourself is a good idea regardless, so we agree on the important part. Smith sat with that for a moment, then nodded once. Fair enough. Hermione had prepared a sign-up sheet with a simple commitment written at the top. I understand that we are learning defense because we believe it is necessary, and I commit to keeping the location and membership of this group private. Everyone signed. Luna signed with a small drawing of a lion next to her name that had a slightly lopsided mane. Then Harry picked up a wand and said, Let's start with the shield charm. Show me what you've got. For the next 2 hours, Harry moved around the room in the way he'd never seen a teacher move at Hogwarts. Not from behind a desk, not from the front of a room, but among people, person to person, watching and correcting and demonstrating with the specific efficiency of someone who understood exactly why a spell wasn't working from the moment he saw the wand movement and the caster's face. He knew why Terry Boots' Protego kept shimmering and collapsing. He was thinking of the shield as a destination rather than a presence. You're trying to build a wall, Harry told him. Think of it as weather, it's already there. You're just acknowledging it. Boot tried it again and his shield held firm, and Boot looked at it and then at Harry with an expression of genuine surprise. He knew why Seamus's spells kept going slightly wide, a degree to the left, consistent enough to be a pattern rather than nerves. The way he held his elbow, the particular angle, compensating for something in his grip. Harry adjusted his arm once, a light precise touch, and Seamus hit the dummy dead center 3 times in a row and whooped. He knew these things not because he'd taught before, but because Solomon's wisdom sat in him like a second pair of eyes that could see magic itself. Not just the spell but the intention behind it, the architecture of how someone was thinking about what they were doing. It made him, he realized, a genuinely good teacher in a way that had nothing to do with experience. Neville was the one he spent the most time with. Neville had arrived knowing his shield charm and not much else, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the expression he wore when he cast. A faint flinch just before the moment of release. So habitual it had become invisible to everyone who knew him. Harry caught it on the first cast and stopped next to him. Hey, Harry said quietly while the rest of the room was busy, you're flinching. I know, Neville said. Why? Neville was quiet for a moment. Because I'm always worried it isn't going to work. That's not a magical problem, Harry said. That's just you expecting yourself to fail. He turned to face him properly. What's the worst thing that could happen if a spell doesn't work the way you want right now, in here? Nothing, Neville said. Nothing happens. Right, so cast it like nothing bad happens because nothing bad happens. Neville cast the shield charm, no flinch. The shield came up clean and bright and strong enough that when Harry cast a light stunning spell against it to test it, the spell deflected with a crack that made 3 people across the room look over. Neville looked at his wand, then at Harry. Something was moving behind his eyes. There it is, Harry said. He clapped him once on the shoulder and moved on. They met 3 times a week. The dates rotated, the times varied, because Harry had thought about Umbridge's likely approach. She was a bureaucrat, which meant she trusted surveillance and documentation, which meant she'd look for patterns, and a shifting schedule was harder to document. He wasn't hiding from her. He just saw no reason to make it convenient. Umbridge did escalate, that was inevitable. She produced Educational Decree No. 24, which banned all student organizations not approved by her and sent copies to every common room in the school. Harry received his copy, read it, and then wrote the meeting times for the next fortnight on a piece of parchment and sent it to all 22 members. She'll find out eventually, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. And then what? Then we'll handle it, Harry said. He looked up from the parchment. Hermione. She's one person with a clipboard and a talent for bureaucratic unpleasantness. We're 22 people learning actual magic. The math isn't complicated. Hermione made the face she made when she agreed with something but felt the need to continue being cautious. Harry had become quite fond of that face. 2 weeks in, Ginny Weasley told him he was the best defense teacher she'd ever had, which he deflected, and she told him not to deflect things, and he found he didn't have a good response to that, and she grinned at him with the particular Weasley grin that suggested she'd won a point and was aware of it. Your reductor curse is excellent, he told her, which was true. It was far beyond fifth-year standard, precise and powerful. Dad taught me some things, she said, before he could get in trouble for it. A pause. This is what the group is for, isn't it? So people like my dad don't have to choose between teaching their kids and following the ministry. Something like that, Harry said. I like it, she said simply and went back to practice. 3 weeks in, Neville could produce a full body bind curse that actually worked, which was something he hadn't managed in 4 years of classes. He did it on the articulated dummy and stood back and looked at it for a long moment. The dummy locked solid, and then he said very quietly to no one in particular, Gran is going to be so surprised. Harry heard it from across the room. He didn't say anything. He just smiled. The 6th meeting was when things got complicated. They were mid-session, Harry demonstrating the impediment jinx at full power against one of the articulated dummies, which flew backward across the room and impacted the far wall hard enough to crack the plaster, which surprised everyone including Harry slightly when the door of the room of requirement opened and Cho Chang walked in. She looked around the room. At the 22 people. At the dummies. At the bookshelves. At Harry. Can I join? She said. Cho Chang had been in Harry's peripheral vision since 3rd year and his direct vision since the Yule Ball. And this year she sat 2 seats behind him in charms, and they had a complicated history of almost conversations that had never quite become real ones because the 4th task had put a wall between them made of grief that neither of them had yet found the right words to dismantle. The room was very quiet. Harry was aware that people were watching him with the specific attention of teenagers waiting to see what happened with a social situation they'd identified as interesting. Yeah, Harry said. Course. She came in, she signed the parchment. She found a space next to Neville and began practicing, and she was, Harry noticed, extremely capable. Her shield charm was textbook perfect, her jinxes precise, her dueling instincts good. She'd clearly been practicing on her own. He worked with her twice during the session, the same way he worked with everyone, adjusting her Expelliarmus to put more shoulder into it, showing her how the timing on a shield affected its strength. They talked about magic and nothing else. It was workmanlike and focused. At the end, as people were filing out, she stopped next to him. Thank you, she said, for letting me come. You didn't need permission, Harry said. Anyone who wants to learn is welcome. She looked at him for a moment. You're different this year. So I'm told, Harry said. Better different, she said. Like she stopped and seemed to decide something. Like you're not carrying it alone anymore, whatever it is. That was more perceptive than Harry had expected, and he looked at her properly for a moment, the way he hadn't quite let himself look before. She looked back, steady and a little sad, the way she'd been sad since last year, with the particular specific sadness of someone who has lost a person and is working out how to carry that loss while still living. I'm sorry about Cedric, Harry said. He'd wanted to say it for months and hadn't found the moment. I'm sorry I couldn't, don't, she said, not unkindly. I know everyone who was there knows it wasn't. She stopped, steadied herself. Just don't apologize for surviving. It's not something you should apologize for. Harry nodded. She left. Neville, who had waited and was pretending he hadn't been listening, said nothing, but gave Harry a look of straightforward sympathy that Harry appreciated more than any number of complicated words. The educational decree, number 26, arrived 2 days later. It required all students to report to the High Inquisitor any information regarding unauthorized student gatherings. Reading between the lines, it was specifically designed as an incentive program for informants. Umbridge was building herself a surveillance network inside the school. Harry read it at breakfast. Around him, the common room was doing the particular buzzing whisper thing it did when something significant had happened, and everyone was processing it at different speeds. She's going to offer things, Harry said. Points, favors, inquisitorial squad badges probably. There'll be people who say yes. Not from our group, Hermione said immediately. Not from our group, Harry agreed. But the information is probably already out there in the general population. 22 people is a lot of people for a secret. So what do? Ron said. Nothing different, Harry said. We keep meeting. If she sends someone to shut it down, we handle it then. Ron looked at him over his porridge. You're very calm about this. I'm very calm about most things, Harry said. That's new, Ron said. Good new, but new. Eat your porridge, Harry said. Draco Malfoy was the one who told Umbridge. Harry knew it within an hour of it happening. Not because anyone informed him, not from any kind of magical intuition, but from straightforward observation. Malfoy left the Slytherin table at breakfast with an expression of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it, walked past the high table slowly enough to drop a folded piece of parchment beside Umbridge's teacup without stopping, and walked out of the Great Hall with his chin up and his shoulders tight in the way shoulders are tight when the body is pretending to be more certain than it is. Harry watched the whole thing. He ate his toast. He went to Transfiguration. He took notes. He turned his inkwell into a small brass compass with a non-standard needle that pointed toward the nearest source of magic rather than north, which made McGonagall stop and look at it for a full 15 seconds before clearing her throat and asking him to reverse it. He went to Charms. He went to Herbology. At 3 in the afternoon, he went to the Room of Requirement and sat in it alone, not to practice, but just to think in a room that had no Umbridge in it and no noise and no eyes. The room gave him a single armchair this time, deep and comfortable, in front of a small fire. He sat in it and stretched his legs out and watched the fire and thought about Malfoy. He thought about the courtyard. The moment after the hex stopped, Malfoy's face going pale. Not just startled, not just caught out, something more uncomfortable than that. Something that looked underneath the fear, like a person who had been told their whole life that the world worked a certain way, that power moved in certain channels, that people like the Potters were disposable and people like the Malfoys were permanent, and who had in a split second in a sunlit courtyard seen evidence that this might not be true. Malfoy had run to Umbridge not out of malice, Harry thought. Well, not only out of malice. He'd run to Umbridge because Umbridge represented the world as Malfoy had been taught it was, because if you were frightened of something, you ran to the structure that was supposed to protect you. Harry felt something almost like sympathy, which surprised him. He sat with it for a while, then he went to dinner. Umbridge came to the 7th meeting. She arrived 20 minutes in, with Filch and 4 members of what she'd apparently already established as the Inquisitorial Squad, Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson, and 2 Slytherin 6th years Harry didn't know well. She had a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. The Room of Requirement was not available to people who hadn't found it through legitimate need, which was why she arrived in the corridor rather than the room itself, and she found 22 5th years standing in a hallway looking calm. Mr. Potter, Umbridge said with a smile that she'd been polishing since someone told her about the meeting. Would you mind explaining to me what this gathering is? A group of students meeting to study, Harry said. Is that against the rules? Educational Decree 24, Umbridge said crisply, prohibits any student gathering not approved by the High Inquisitor. We submitted a request, Harry said. She blinked. This was clearly not what she'd prepared for. You what? Hermione, Harry said. Hermione produced a piece of parchment with the efficiency of someone who had been prepared for exactly this moment. We submitted a request to form a study group 3 weeks ago, she said pleasantly. Through the proper channels as defined by Educational Decree 22, Section 4. Your office acknowledged receipt. We received no reply, which under the statute means the request is in a state of provisional approval pending review. Umbridge looked at the parchment. She looked at Hermione. She looked at Harry. There is nothing provisional about. Section 4, Paragraph 3, Hermione said helpfully, of the Hogwarts Educational Charter, which predates the decrees and therefore has jurisdictional precedence in procedural matters. She smiled the smile of someone who had very much enjoyed finding that paragraph. We're on very solid legal ground. Umbridge's smile had gone rigid. Her large eyes moved from Hermione to Harry. What is this group studying, Mr. Potter? Defense, Harry said. Defense against the dark arts is covered in my, with respect, Harry said. Your curriculum covers theory, we're covering practice. He paused. Students have a right to learn practical magic. I don't think any version of the educational decrees successfully argues otherwise, and if they try to, someone should probably notify the Wisengamot, because restricting practical magical education would have some interesting legal implications. He said it the same way he said everything, plainly, without aggression, without particular emphasis, like he was pointing out that the sky was a notable shade of blue. Umbridge looked at him with those large, flat eyes and the fixed smile, and behind the smile Harry could see something working, the calculation of someone who had built their power on people being afraid of it, and who was running into someone who wasn't. This isn't over, Mr. Potter, she said. I know, Harry said. See you in class. Umbridge turned and left, and Filch shot Harry a look of considerable dislike, and Malfoy, in the process of turning to follow, caught Harry's eye for half a second and then looked away quickly. The Inquisitorial Squad swept down the corridor. The 22 members of what Hermione had apparently already started calling Dumbledore's Army in the sign-up sheet's header stood in the corridor and did not cheer because Harry had given them a look that said not yet without words, and they'd learned by now to read him pretty well. Did you actually submit that request? Ron asked Hermione, awed. The moment I knew about the decree, she said, 4 weeks ago. You prepared for this 4 weeks ago. I prepare for everything, Hermione said, with the tone of someone for whom this is a basic factual statement about themselves and not a boast. Ron looked at Harry. We have the best people. We do, Harry agreed. They had the meeting anyway, best session they'd had. Neville produced a stunning spell that knocked the heaviest articulated dummy clean off its base and across the room, and then stood and looked at it lying on the floor with an expression that was going to be very different from how he'd started the year. Umbridge's response to the legal argument came in the form of Educational Decree No. 27, which arrived on a Thursday morning and closed the procedural loophole Hermione had used with an almost impressive specificity that suggested the ministry had very good lawyers who had been given the relevant section of the educational charter and 12 hours to be unpleasant about it. Harry read it. Clever, he said. It's not clever, Hermione said, offended on behalf of her own cleverness. It's reactive, she's playing catch-up. She's still closing the door, Ron pointed out. The door she's closing, Harry said, is the legal one. She can't close the actual room. She doesn't know where it is. He folded the decree neatly. We just don't have cover anymore. We're officially in breach of the rules. Are you worried about that? Neville asked. He'd been sitting at the table listening with the increasingly grounded attention he'd been bringing to everything lately. No, Harry said. Good, Neville said. Me neither, actually, which is, I should say, that's new for me. Harry looked at him. It's good new, he said. And Neville smiled in the quiet way of someone who was getting comfortable with being capable. The Quidditch pitch in the November fog was a particular kind of miserable, the cold coming in off the lake sideways, the goal posts vanishing into gray at their tops, the grass too wet and the air too thick. Harry loved it. He'd signed up for Quidditch tryouts in September and made Seeker again without any drama. The tryout had involved him catching the snitch 17 times in 40 minutes at a level of speed that made the rest of the Gryffindor team stop and just watch. And Angelina had told him he was remade Seeker, and she'd see him at practice on Thursday with an expression suggesting she was equal parts delighted and unnerved. He was on the pitch alone at 7 in the morning when Draco Malfoy appeared. This surprised him. Not the appearance itself, the Slytherin team had the pitch after Gryffindor, it was on the schedule, but the fact that Malfoy was alone. No Crabbe, no Goyle, no retinue of hangers-on, just Malfoy in his Quidditch robes, broom in hand, looking like someone who had decided to have a conversation and regretted the decision before he'd started walking. Harry landed. He looked at Malfoy, he waited. I told her, Malfoy said, Umbridge, about your group. I know, Harry said. Malfoy looked slightly thrown that he didn't need to confess it more dramatically. And you're not angry? Harry considered it honestly. Number, I understand why you did it. The question is whether you'd do it again. Malfoy looked at him. Would it matter? To you maybe, Harry said. Look, I'm not going to pretend what you did was nothing, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand the position you're in. Your entire family is tied to Voldemort's agenda. Your dad is a Death Eater. You've been raised in a very specific worldview about how things are supposed to work, and then things stopped working that way, and now you're standing on a pitch in November at 7 in the morning having a conversation you didn't plan to have. He paused. That's actually a hard place to be. Malfoy's jaw was working. I didn't come here for your pity. I'm not pitying you, Harry said. I'm just being accurate. How can you be this? You're supposed to hate me, Malfoy said, and it came out with more honesty than he'd intended. Harry could see the moment Malfoy heard himself and wanted to take it back. Why would I hate you? Harry said. You're not the one I'm fighting. You're someone who made a bad decision because you were scared. That's just human. Malfoy stared at him. The gray eyes doing something complicated. The Dark Lord is going to come back properly soon. I know, Harry said, and people who aren't on his side are going to need to be able to defend themselves, Harry said. Yeah, he let that sit between them for a moment. My group meets 3 times a week, you know where to find it. He mounted his broom and flew back up into the fog, and below him Draco Malfoy stood on the grass with his own broom and looked up after him and didn't say anything at all. The ministry sent orders on a Tuesday. Harry was in potions when word reached him, not through any magical means, just through the entirely reliable school communication network of someone having told someone, which in a school of 500 students takes approximately 12 minutes to cover all available territory. Dumbledore's army was to be shut down. 2 ministry orders were in Dumbledore's office. There was some kind of confrontation happening. Harry finished his potion. It was a strengthening solution that he'd produced in 45 minutes despite the fact that Snape's instructions usually required 2 hours, which had made Snape stand over his cauldron for a full minute in silence before writing a comment in the margins of his notes that Harry couldn't read and didn't particularly need to. He took his notes and handed in his solution and walked out of the dungeon and went up to Dumbledore's office. He didn't have the password. The gargoyle moved out of his way anyway, which surprised him until he thought about it. Gargoyle, guardian enchantment, sensing what he was, and then it surprised him less. He walked up the spiral stairs and opened the door. There were two Aurors in green robes he didn't know well, a man and a woman, both older, both with the particular bearing of people who are used to rooms making way for them. They were standing in the center of Dumbledore's office in a way that was designed to communicate authority. Dumbledore was behind his desk. Between them, on a chair that had clearly been placed there and not chosen, was Umbridge, looking satisfied. Everyone looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, the male Auror said, his name badge read Dawlish. This doesn't concern you, return to your classes. It does concern me, Harry said pleasantly. It's my group you're discussing. Harry, Dumbledore said, his voice was very careful. Perhaps it's fine, Harry said, looking at Dumbledore for a moment. Something passed between them, not warm, not quite, but real, recognition. I know what this is, let me handle it. What's the ministry's position? Dawlish looked at him the way people look at things that are not behaving as expected. The ministry's position is that the organization you've been running in breach of Educational Decree 24 will be immediately dissolved, and you and the other members will face disciplinary action up to and including expulsion. Based on what evidence, Harry said. We have a signed witness statement from someone who reported that students were meeting to practice defense magic, Harry said. Which is legal, which is not prohibited by any Hogwarts statute or ministry code, which has direct precedent in school clubs going back 400 years. He looked at Dawlish. The educational decrees prohibit unauthorized organizations. We submitted for authorization. The authorization process was manipulated after the fact to deny us through a retroactive decree. You'd have to take that argument to the Wisengamot, and the Wisengamot would have questions about Decree 27's compatibility with the Hogwarts Educational Charter of 1492. Dawlish stared at him. Umbridge said, the ministry. I'm talking to the Auror, Harry said, not looking at her. Not to you. The silence in the office was significant. Fawkes on his perch in the corner opened one eye. You're 15 years old, Dawlish said. Yes, Harry said. I'm also right, which isn't especially related to how old I am. He looked at the Auror steadily. I know why you're here. The ministry wants to make it impossible for students at this school to learn to defend themselves against Voldemort, because acknowledging that they need to is the same as acknowledging that Voldemort is back, and that's information the minister has decided is problematic. I understand the political logic. But Aurors, he looked at both of them, are supposed to protect people. What you're being asked to do right now is make students less able to protect themselves. That's not what you signed up for. The woman Auror, her badge read Proudfoot, had gone very still. Something moved behind her eyes. We have our orders, Dawlish said, but it had less weight than before. I'm not stopping you from following them, Harry said. I'm just pointing out what they actually are. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression Harry couldn't fully decode, something between pride and something more complicated that lived in the same territory as unease. Dawlish and Proudfoot exchanged a look. Then Dawlish said, we'll be reporting this conversation to the minister. Please do, Harry said. They left. They walked past Harry without looking at him, out the door, down the stairs. Umbridge followed, shooting him a look that had moved entirely past sugar into something that was simply cold. When the door closed, the office was quiet. Dumbledore sat at his desk and Harry stood in the middle of the room and they looked at each other. Sit down, Harry, Dumbledore said. I'm all right standing, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression shifted just slightly, the first real acknowledgement of what was in the room. You handled that remarkably well. You were going to let them shut it down, Harry said, not accusatory, just accurate. I was going to manage the situation, Dumbledore said carefully. By letting them have this one so they'd settle for it, Harry said, giving them a win here to protect something larger. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. That is a possible reading. It's the accurate reading, Harry said, and I understand the chess logic of it. I just disagree with it because the thing you were going to sacrifice is 22 students learning to defend themselves, and the thing you were protecting is your ability to continue operating with the ministry not fully aware of what you're doing. He paused. With respect, sir, your agenda and theirs are not the same agenda, and sometimes I need you to know that I know that. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. His blue eyes on Harry with an intensity that Harry met without difficulty and without aggression, just met it, the way you meet someone's eyes when you're saying something true and don't need them to agree, only to hear it. You have changed, Dumbledore said, quietly, almost to himself. Yes, Harry said. The power is mine, Harry said. Completely and permanently mine. I know you'll want to understand it, and I'll tell you what I can, but not today. He looked around the office, the portraits, the sleeping headmasters of centuries past, the silver instruments on their delicate tables, the whole accumulated weight of the institution. Today I just needed you to know that the group continues. He turned to go. Harry. Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. Harry turned. The headmaster was still at his desk, and he looked for a moment genuinely old, not ancient, not monumentally aged the way he normally wore his years, but simply old, like a man who has been carrying something for too long and is beginning to feel the weight. Be careful, Dumbledore said, not of umbrage, of the weight of being certain. Harry considered that. It was the most honest thing Dumbledore had said to him since before the tournament. I'll remember that, he said, and he meant it. He went back to his classes. That evening, in the room of requirement, 22 people practiced magic with the focused intensity of students who'd heard something had happened and didn't know the details, and were finding the practice itself the best response to uncertainty. Harry moved among them and corrected and demonstrated and occasionally stepped in to be a live target, holding absolutely still while 3 different people cast shield charms that he tested against with increasing force, an exercise that required them to mean what they cast, and required him to confirm it by leaning genuinely against it and feeling the charm hold or collapse. At the end, Neville produced a spell Harry hadn't taught him. It was a modified version of the impediment jinx, altered in some way Harry could feel but couldn't immediately categorize, the timing different, the directional component split, the effect broader. It hit the dummy and held it in place far more effectively than the standard version. Harry stopped. Neville, what was that? Neville blinked. I was thinking about how the standard jinx only works at a specific angle, and I thought if you sort of spread the, he made a gesture that was more accurate than his words. I'm not sure I could explain it. You modified the spell, Harry said, on your own. By accident, Neville said. Spell modification doesn't happen by accident, Harry said. It happens when someone understands the mechanics well enough to think past them. He looked at Neville for a moment with genuine satisfaction. Show everyone how you held your wand when you did it. Neville showed them. It worked for 6 people immediately, 7 more by the end of the session. They were filing out an hour later when Luna appeared at Harry's elbow. She had a way of doing this, appearing without fanfare, as if she'd been there for a while and you'd simply not noticed. The Nargles are interested in what you're doing, she said. Are they? Harry said. They usually cluster around significant things. She tilted her head. Dumbledore is worried about you, not in the way that people worry about things they think are dangerous, in the way that people worry about things they thought they understood and don't anymore. That's a pretty good read, Harry said. He's used to being the most capable person in the room, Luna said without unkindness. It's been true for a very long time. It's a difficult thing to stop being true. Harry looked at her. Luna, how do you always know things? I pay attention, she said simply. Then she floated off down the corridor with her bag swinging and her shoes untied, and Harry watched her go, and thought that she was probably the most perceptive person in the school and always had been, and everyone had been too busy dismissing her to notice. He stood in the empty corridor outside the room of requirement, which had turned back into unremarkable wall behind him, and he looked up and down the 7th-floor hallway with its tapestries and its familiar stone, and its Hogwarts smell of old books and chalk, and something sweet coming from the direction of the kitchen. The storm outside was audible even from here, the wind against the tower windows, the distant roll of thunder over the mountains. Harry felt it in his skin the way he always did now, a kind of resonance, a tuning fork to his own frequency. He thought about Neville, who'd modified a spell by accident because he'd understood it well enough to think beyond it. He thought about Hermione's 4-week preparation, about Ron's uncomplicated delight, about Ginny's sharpness, about Luna's clear, strange accuracy. About 22 people in a room getting genuinely better at something that mattered. He thought about Malfoy on the Quidditch pitch. You're supposed to hate me. He thought about what he'd said to Dumbledore. Your agenda and theirs are not the same agenda. He thought about whether he'd been too direct and decided he hadn't, and thought about whether Dumbledore needed to hear it and decided he had. He thought about Solomon in that chamber below the world who had said, power is not a substitute for people. He went to bed. Outside, over the forbidden forest, lightning struck the tallest oak and the forest animals went very quiet. And the strike had a quality that was different from ordinary storm lightning. It was precise, it was purposeful, it came and was gone in a breath. And where it had struck, the tree was neither broken nor burned, but simply lit from inside for a long moment, luminous as a lantern. Then the storm moved on. And in the castle, in the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry Potter slept without dreams, with the thundersteady certainty of someone who knows what tomorrow is for. Chapter 4. The Weight of Lightning. December arrived the way December always arrived at Hogwarts, all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. One morning the grounds were merely cold and the next they were buried, the lake frozen at the edges, the forbidden forest dark and heavy under snow, the castle itself exhaling warmth into the gray sky from every chimney and window like a living thing breathing. Harry noticed it the way he noticed most things now, clearly, without the buffer of distraction. The cold didn't bother him. He'd gone out at 6 in the morning, the first day of real snow, and walked the grounds without a cloak, hands in his pockets, feeling the temperature as information rather than discomfort. He passed Hagrid's hut, where a light was on and the smell of something extraordinary was coming from the chimney, and he stopped and knocked. Hagrid opened the door with a face full of flour and something alive and indeterminate tucked under one arm. Harry. Come in, I was Juice. Mind the no, Don, sit there. Harry stepped over something that moved and sat in the chair that didn't have things on it, and accepted a mug of tea that could have stripped paint, and watched Hagrid bustle around his kitchen with the enormous, clumsy warmth that was entirely specific to him. The thing under Hagrid's arm had resolved itself into a very young niffler that had apparently decided the flour jar was treasure. How are ye getting on? Hagrid said, setting the niffler on the table where it immediately went for Harry's teaspoon. Well, Harry said he meant it. Heard aboo the orders, Hagrid said, lowering himself into his chair with a creak. Word gets around. It usually does. Dumbledore was. Hagrid stopped himself. Hagrid had a particular quality of loyalty that wasn't blind. He knew things about the people he was loyal to, saw them clearly, and loved them anyway, and Harry could see him editing himself in real time. He was quiet after, quieter than usual. We talked, Harry said. Hagrid looked at him. The black eyes were shrewd under the bushy brows. You're different, he said. Good different, but he seemed to be working out how to say something. You're not scared of him, he said finally. Of Dumbledore, and he's Dumbledore. I know who he is, Harry said. I also know that being brilliant and being right aren't the same thing. Hagrid was quiet for a moment. The niffler found his teaspoon and made a break for the edge of the table. Harry caught it one-handed without looking. The niffler looked up at him with enormous eyes and reconsidered its life. He cares about ya, Harry, Hagrid said. He's always. I know, Harry said. That's not the problem. He put the niffler back in the middle of the table. The problem is that caring about someone and being honest with them are two different choices, and he keeps picking the first one at the expense of the second. He drank his paint-stripping tea. I like him, I just don't need him to manage me anymore. Hagrid sat with that, then slowly nodded. Your mum was like that, he said quietly. Lily couldn't be managed either. Dumbledore loved her for it, and it drove him mad. A pause. Your dad too, in his own way. James couldn't be made to stay anywhere he decided to leave. Harry looked at him. This was more about his parents than he usually got, delivered without ceremony, without the careful packaging people normally used when talking about James and Lily Potter to their son. He felt the warmth of it somewhere in his chest. Thanks, Hagrid, he said. For what? For saying that like it's just a fact, Harry said, not like you're giving me something. Hagrid blinked, then smiled, the enormous smile that reorganized his whole face. Come by whenever ye want, he said. I've got flobberworms that need rehousing, and the company'd be welcome. Harry went back to the castle through the snow with his hands still in his pockets, and the cold still didn't bother him. And above him the sky was heavy and white and full of weather that had nowhere else to be. The letter from Sirius arrived the same morning. Not the careful kind Sirius had been sending, the coded, cautious correspondence of a man who knew his letters might be intercepted and wrote accordingly, which always made him sound slightly unlike himself, like Sirius with the volume turned down. This one was longer, less careful. The handwriting had a quality that Harry recognized as someone writing quickly with feeling. Harry, something's happening at the ministry. I can't put it in a letter, but I need you to know it involves the Department of Mysteries and something Dumbledore is very worried about. He won't tell me the details, which means he doesn't want me to tell you, which means I'm caught between him and you, and I've decided that I'd rather err on the side of you knowing something exists than not knowing. There is a room in the Department of Mysteries that Voldemort wants to access. I don't know what's in it. What I know is that he's been trying to get something from that room for months, and the Order has been keeping watch. The reason I'm telling you this is that I have a feeling, and I know how that sounds, but I've learned to trust my feelings. 12 years of Azkaban will do that at some point Voldemort is going to try to use you to get it. Some kind of pressure. Some kind of trick. I trust you. I trust you more than I trust most people's strategy. Just know it's there. I'm going mad in this house. Buckbeak says hello, or he would if he could talk. He did do something with his head that I'm choosing to interpret as affectionate. Love, Sirius. Harry read it twice. He folded it and put it in his pocket next to the space where the ministry letters had been in July, which he'd long since burned because he didn't need paper to remember things anymore. The Department of Mysteries, something Voldemort wanted, something Dumbledore was guarding. He thought about this the way he thought about most things now, systematically, without panic, turning it over in the light. Voldemort wanted something and couldn't simply take it. Which meant it was protected in a way that required something Voldemort didn't have. Which meant either a person or an object or a permission of some kind. He thought about the prophecy. He hadn't been told about it yet. That was another of Dumbledore's managed silences, but Solomon's wisdom was a patient thing, and it had been assembling information for months, and certain shapes were becoming clear. Something about Harry and Voldemort, something recorded before Harry was born, something that both of them were part of that defined the terms of their conflict in ways that neither of them had chosen. He was going to need to know what it said. He went to find Dumbledore. This was, he was aware, slightly amusing. The last chapter of their relationship had ended with Harry walking out of Dumbledore's office having made a point and left before the old man could respond. And now Harry was walking back in because he wanted information. And that was a different kind of conversation that required a different kind of approach. He didn't knock this time. He thought the word clearly. I need to talk to Dumbledore, the same kind of intention that opened the room of requirement, and the gargoyle moved. Dumbledore was at his desk writing, and he looked up without surprise when Harry came in, which suggested either that he'd seen Harry coming with some kind of monitoring charm or that he'd been expecting this conversation for a while and Harry's timing had simply confirmed it. Harry, he said. He gestured at the chair across from his desk. Sit down. Harry sat. This time he meant to. Sirius wrote to me, Harry said. I suspected he might, Dumbledore said, and the tone of it was the tone of someone who had weighed whether to prevent this and decided against intervention, which Harry noted as a small movement in the right direction. He mentioned the Department of Mysteries, Harry said. He mentioned Voldemort wants something there. He mentioned the Order has been guarding it. Harry looked at Dumbledore. I need to know what it is. Dumbledore set down his quill. He laced his fingers together on the desk, the peculiarly formal gesture of a man arranging himself for a difficult conversation. His blue eyes were very steady. There is a reason I have not told you, he said. I know there is, Harry said. I'm asking you to reconsider it. The reason, Harry said, is that you believe the information would change how I behave. You believe that if I know the full shape of what Voldemort is after, I'll act on that knowledge in ways you haven't planned for. He watched Dumbledore's face. The old man did not deny it. The problem with that reasoning is that withholding information from someone you're trying to protect doesn't actually protect them. It just means they make decisions without complete facts. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. In the corner, Fawkes made a soft sound, not a song, just a note like a question. You have thought about this carefully, Dumbledore said. I think about most things carefully now, Harry said. Something changed in me this summer, and I know you've been working out what it is, and I'm going to tell you because it's relevant. He straightened in the chair. I'm not going to give you the full mechanics because honestly I don't think they'd help you plan anything. But the short version is that I have access to wisdom, speed, strength, endurance, courage, and lightning-based magic that has no parallel in modern wizarding practice. I'm telling you this not to frighten you or to position myself against you, but because you need accurate information to make good decisions. The same reason I need accurate information. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The office was quiet. The instruments on their delicate silver tables rotated and measured and did their quiet permanent work. Outside, snow was falling again, steady and thick. A prophecy, Dumbledore said at last. The word dropped into the room with the specific gravity of something that has been withheld for too long. Tell me, Harry said. Dumbledore told him. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Harry sat with it. He felt Hermione's voice in his head saying it could mean any number of things, felt the instinct to parse and qualify and find exceptions in the language, and then he set that aside and looked at it plainly. Either must die at the hand of the other. He thought about that. He turned it over. He looked at it from the angle that Dumbledore had been looking at it for 15 years, the angle that produced a boy kept in a cupboard under stairs. A boy sent back every summer to Surrey. A boy kept slightly desperate and slightly controlled and never quite given the full picture. He understood, sitting in this chair in December snow, what Dumbledore's 15-year plan had been. Keep Harry alive until he was ready to be used, then use him. A weapon that wasn't told it was a weapon, aimed at a target in ways the weapon couldn't circumvent if it didn't know the terms. He wasn't angry. He genuinely wasn't. It was too clear for anger. He could see the decision tree from 15 years ago, Dumbledore, faced with a prophecy and a dead set of parents and an infant with a scar, making the choice that seemed strategically soundest under impossible circumstances. He wasn't a monster. He was a brilliant man who had made brilliant mistakes. You were going to let me die, Harry said. I was going to ensure that when the time came, Dumbledore said carefully, you would be prepared to die, Harry said. You were going to prepare me to die because the prophecy says one of us has to. Dumbledore's eyes were very old, not ancient old in the specific way of something that has carried knowledge it would prefer not to have. There is a piece of Voldemort's soul attached to you, Harry, he said. Inside you. When he tried to kill you as an infant, the curse rebounded, and a fragment of his soul, it made a home in you in the scar. That piece must be destroyed if Voldemort is to be truly defeated. And the way to destroy it, Harry said, is for Voldemort to use the killing curse on me again. I believed so, Dumbledore said, until recently. His eyes moved over Harry with the assessing quality of someone revising an enormous assumption. I no longer know if that is true. The power you carry now, I don't know what it does to that calculation. Harry sat with that for a moment. He looked at his own hands. He thought about the Horcrux, which was the word for it. He had the word from Solomon's bottomless library, the word for what Voldemort had made, the dark anchors of an immortality built on murder. He thought about the one inside him. He had been aware of it vaguely as a kind of background noise, a frequency just under his own, slightly wrong, like a note played a quarter tone flat. He'd felt it more clearly since the transformation, the way you feel a splinter more clearly once you're not numb. Can I ask you something? Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. When you were planning this, when you were keeping me in the dark, keeping me in Surrey, managing my information, building me toward a sacrifice you weren't going to warn me about. He looked at Dumbledore. Did you think you were doing it for me or for the wizarding world? The question sat in the room. Fawkes turned on his perch. The snow fell. Both, Dumbledore said. I believed them to be the same. They weren't, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said quietly, they were not. That was, Harry thought, the most honest thing Albus Dumbledore had ever said to him. He felt it land with the specific gravity of a real thing, not a managed truth, not a strategic disclosure, but something that cost the old man something to say. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Okay. I'm not going to spend the energy being angry at you for it, Harry said. It's done and I understand why, and I need us to be able to work together going forward, which means I need to trust that you'll be straight with me from here. He looked at Dumbledore. Can you do that? Another long pause. Then I will try, Harry, sincerely. Good enough, Harry said. He stood. The Horcrux, I want to do some research. I need to understand what I'm carrying and whether the transformation changed anything about it. I'll come to you when I have questions, Harry said. I'd rather approach it fresh. He moved toward the door. One more thing. Yes, there are other Horcruxes, Harry said. Voldemort wouldn't have stopped at one. He would have made as many as he thought were safe. We need to find them. Dumbledore was very still. You know about the others. I figured it out, Harry said. The logic is clear once you understand what a Horcrux is. A man who is afraid of death and willing to split his soul doesn't do it once. He does it as many times as he can. He looked at Dumbledore. You've been collecting information about his past, his significant objects, things he would have used. I have a memory collection, Dumbledore said slowly, that I have been building. Then we should look at it together, Harry said. When you're ready, he left. He walked back down the spiral stairs into the corridor and stood in the stone hallway with the snow outside the window and breathed out slowly. He felt something that wasn't quite relief but lived adjacent to it, the specific loosening that comes when a complicated situation becomes, if not simpler, then at least fully visible. He knew everything now. The prophecy, the Horcrux, Dumbledore's plan, the Department of Mysteries. He'd walked into that office with questions and walked out with answers, and none of the answers were good exactly, but all of them were real, and real was what he needed. He went back to the common room. Sirius arrived 3 days later, not through a letter this time, through the actual flu in Dumbledore's office, which Harry was told about by a slightly frantic portrait that had apparently been dispatched to carry the message and was very proud of its efficiency. Harry went up to find Sirius standing in the office looking thinner than he should have been and with the specific restlessness of someone who had been inside for too long, and when he saw Harry he crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed him by the shoulders. You're all right, Sirius said. It wasn't a question but it landed like one. I'm all right, Harry said. Sirius looked at him, really looked, the way he'd looked on the stairs at Grimmauld Place on that first night with the careful attention of someone who loves another person enough to actually see them. You talked to Dumbledore, he said. Yes, he told you. Yes. Sirius let go of his shoulders and ran a hand through his dark hair and turned to the window with the Azkaban restlessness working through him, the inability to be fully still that would probably never entirely go away. I wanted to tell you. All year you have no idea how many letters I started. You told me what you could, Harry said. It was enough. It wasn't serious, Harry said it gently. It was enough. I figured out the rest. Sirius turned from the window. He looked at Harry and this time what moved on his face was something close to amazement, the specific amazement of watching someone you've been worried about be genuinely, completely fine, more than fine. You know you terrify him, Sirius said. Dumbledore. He terrifies him or what I am terrifies him, Harry said. Both, Sirius said. It's the same thing, same as it was with your dad. James used to walk into a room and Dumbledore would have to. He stopped, smiling suddenly, the real smile that made him look young. He'd have to mentally revise the situation. James never fit into anyone's plan for him either. I know, Harry said. Hagrid told me. Sirius's face did something brief and complicated at the mention of Hagrid, and then he said, "What's the plan? Actually, not Dumbledore's plan, your plan." Harry sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk. Dumbledore had tactfully left them alone, which was either genuine courtesy or an acknowledgement that this conversation needed to happen without him present. Harry thought probably both. "The Horcruxes first," Harry said. "Voldemort can't die while they exist. We need to find them and destroy them. Dumbledore has information, a memory collection. We're going to go through it together." "How many?" "I don't know yet, more than one." Sirius let out a long breath. "And the Department of Mysteries, the prophecy?" "He wants the prophecy because he doesn't know the full text of it," Harry said. "He only knows what Snape told him, which was partial. He wants to hear the full version because he thinks it'll tell him how to beat me." He looked at Sirius. "It won't, but he doesn't know that, so he'll come for it." "Eventually," Harry said, "or he'll try to make me come for it, use someone I care about." He paused. "I've thought about that. If he tries to use you, Harry, if he tries to use you, I need you to know that I will come," Harry said. "But not because I've been tricked. Because you're my family, and that's a reason that doesn't require manipulation to produce. The difference matters." He held Sirius's gaze. "I just need you to trust that I can handle whatever I walk into." Sirius looked at him for a very long moment. The thin face, the dark eyes that had too much Azkaban in them, but also underneath that, something that was purely and entirely James Potter's best friend, the man who had helped guard a nursery in Godric's Hollow, who had believed enough in something to go to prison for it. "I trust you," Sirius said. "Without completely, He stopped. "You're still 15, Harry." "I know," Harry said. "I'm also the god of lightning." "Combination is unusual." Sirius stared at him. Then he laughed, the real laugh, the big one, the Azkaban surviving laugh that was loud enough that one of the portraits complained. "God of lightning," he said. "Your father would have had thoughts about that." "Good thoughts," Harry said. "Absolutely insufferable ones," Sirius said. "He would have been so smug about it. He would have found a way to make it about him. It would have been completely unbearable." He was still laughing. He would have loved it so much. Harry grinned. It was a real one, the kind that reached wherever grins came from, deeper than the face. They sat in Dumbledore's office in the snowlight and talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular: Sirius's cabin fever, Buckbeak's most recent theft, the twins' latest products, a particular incident with Creature, and a casserole that neither of them could describe with full accuracy because it had apparently been so alarming that both Sirius and Mrs. Weasley had arrived at slightly different accounts. Harry talked about Neville's spell modification, about Cho, about Hagrid's Niffler, about McGonagall's expression when she'd looked at his Compassinquel for 15 seconds before asking him to reverse it. "She'll bring that up in your OWL recommendation," Sirius predicted. "She'll say something like demonstrates exceptional creative impulse, requires channeling." "She said something similar about my dad." "Near enough," Sirius said. "He transfigured Professor Slughorn's chair into a deck chair during a potions exam. Not maliciously, he'd finished the exam and got bored. Slughorn was apparently not even angry, he just sat in the deck chair." He smiled at the memory. "That's the thing about genuine talent. Even the people it inconveniences can't entirely object to it." Harry filed that away in the collection of things about his parents that were real rather than mythological, the small true details that made them people rather than symbols. He would never not want those. When Sirius left through the flue, he gripped Harry's shoulder once at the fireplace, the solid grip of a person saying something without words, and Harry put his hand over Sirius's briefly and then stepped back. The green flames took him. Harry stood in the empty office for a moment. The Christmas holidays arrived with half the school departing for home and Grimmauld Place filling back up with Weasleys, and Harry went with them because there was nowhere else, and also because it was where he wanted to be, which was not the same thing and mattered. He used the Christmas fortnight for 3 things. He sat with Dumbledore twice formally in the office, once more casually over tea that McGonagall joined for 45 minutes and spoke almost entirely about transfiguration theory with the barely concealed passion of someone who had spent 30 years teaching foundational material and was vibrating slightly at the opportunity to talk about something more interesting, and they went through the pensive together. The memories, a very young Tom Riddle in an orphanage, the particular coldness behind the eyes already assembled and working. Tom Riddle in Hogwarts, already collecting, already building, already turning things over in his mind that the people around him couldn't see. Tom Riddle asking Professor Slughorn about Horcruxes over dinner, the question casual and not casual at all, and Slughorn's face doing the thing it did when someone clever said something uncomfortable. Harry watched all of it with Solomon's clarity. He watched Voldemort build himself out of someone else's fear, and his own will and an intelligence that had never been given anything worth applying to, and he understood in the way that clarity sometimes forces understanding that Voldemort was not unfathomable. He was not beyond comprehension. He was a man who had been terrified of his own mortality and had done every terrible thing in pursuit of not dying. The locket, Harry said at the end of the third session. The cup, the snake, something of Ravenclaw or Gryffindor. He'd have wanted the complete set for symmetry. The ring he already destroyed. You're missing a finger. He looked at Dumbledore's blackened hand. The diary destroyed second year. That's 2. The ring is 3. That leaves the locket, the cup, the snake, something from Ravenclaw or Gryffindor and me. He looked at Dumbledore. 7. He'd have wanted 7. Dumbledore was looking at him with the particular expression that Harry had come to think of as reassessment mode. The face Dumbledore wore when he was revising a significant assumption in real time. The timeline I had estimated for locating them all is too slow, Harry said. We need to move faster. Not because Voldemort is about to make his big move. He's not. He's still rebuilding. He needs his Death Eaters organized and his body fully restored to power and a plan he's confident in, but because the Horcruxes need to be gone before he does anything that creates a crisis, not after. How do you know his timeline? Dumbledore said. I'm thinking like him, Harry said. With Solomon's wisdom applied to everything I know about his history and personality and method, he's deliberate. He was patient enough to wait 13 years as a wraith. He won't rush now. We have time. Not infinite time, but time. He paused, probably until spring. That is consistent with what the Order's intelligence suggests, Dumbledore said carefully. Good, Harry said. Then we agree. The second thing Harry did over Christmas was push himself. Privately alone in the early mornings when even the Weasleys weren't up, the garden of Grimmauld Place covered in snow, the sky purple-black and full of stars. He tested the full range of what he was, he called lightning. Not accidentally, not as a reflex, but deliberately, standing in the garden with his arms loose at his sides and his eyes open and his intention clear. The sky answered. A bolt came straight down into the garden and hit the frozen earth 2 feet from where he stood, and the ground cracked and smoked, and the surrounding snow flashed to steam in a 5-foot radius. He felt it move through him, not destructive, not chaotic, but responsive, like a large animal that had recognized its person. He called it again, and again. He learned the shape of it the way a musician learns a new instrument, not by thinking about it but by doing it repeatedly in different conditions at different scales. He learned that he could throw it, not just call it down. He learned that he could direct it precisely enough to hit a specific stone on a wall 20 meters away, and he learned that he could dim it to something barely brighter than a spark, and he learned that it was always, always his. He ran. Really ran, without limiting himself, through the narrow streets around Grimmauld Place at 3 in the morning when no one was watching. He learned what Mercury's speed actually meant in practical terms, not just fast, but impossibly fast, the world going slightly strange at the edges when he pushed it. The cold air a wall he moved through rather than felt. The distance between street lamps gone before he'd finished the thought of crossing it. He could cross a city block between one heartbeat and the next. He found that deeply, simply wonderful. He practiced with the Horcrux inside himself. Not with any intention of damaging it, not yet, not until he understood what destroying it meant for him, but with the careful investigation of someone mapping a space. He sat in the cold garden very still and turned his awareness inward and found it, the fragment of Voldemort's soul lodged in his scar, and he looked at it with Solomon's clarity and understood its nature completely. It was attached to him, but it was not him. It was a foreign object, a structural intruder, and the thing that had changed in him since July was so fundamentally different from what it was built to contain that it was, he could see, beginning to be uncomfortable. Like a splinter in a wound that was healing around it instead of festering. He thought about that. He filed it away. The third thing Harry did over Christmas was spend time with people. He played chess with Ron, who won 3 games and lost 4, and spent the losses analyzing them with the tactical enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the process as much as the outcome. He helped Hermione build a research system for the Horcrux investigation. She'd taken to it with ferocious competence the moment he'd explained the full picture, producing a cross-referenced index of dark artifact literature within 48 hours that was better than anything the Hogwarts library would have yielded in a month. He taught Ginny a modified version of the reductor curse he'd developed, not from Solomon's knowledge directly but from his own understanding growing to meet it, that had a delayed detonation property she immediately loved and immediately improved upon, which he found genuinely exciting. He sat with Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen on Christmas morning while she cooked, and she talked about Arthur's recovery from the snake attack, He'd heard about this through Ron, the order mission gone wrong, the hospital visit, the fear of it, and she talked about it with the particular courage of someone who had been very frightened and had not let the fear make her small. "You're sure you're all right?" she said to Harry at one point. She said it the way she always said it, with the full weight of the question. "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment, the way mothers look at people who need looking at. "You're more all right than last year," she said. "A lot more," Harry said. She went back to the cooking. "Good," she said firmly, the same word Harry thought that Moody and Sirius and Hagrid and Neville had all found in their different ways. It seemed to be the correct response to who he was becoming. They went back to Hogwarts in January, and 3 things happened in quick succession. The first was that Umbridge began classroom inspections of all teachers, which produced one of Harry's favorite moments of the entire year. Watching McGonagall, during an inspection, be questioned about her teaching methods by Umbridge in tones of insufferable condescension, and watching McGonagall look at her for a long moment and then very calmly, very precisely, absolutely shred every one of Umbridge's stated pedagogical positions using 40 years of mastery delivered in the tone of someone explaining things to a slow student. Umbridge's clipboard clattered. McGonagall returned to the lesson without pausing for breath. Harry gave her top marks in his notes, which were not required and which she never read but which he'd taken out of genuine admiration. The second was that Neville owled his grandmother about the modified impediment jinx and received a reply that said, in handwriting as upright and precise as a military fence, "Neville, your grandfather would have been extremely proud. Do it again." Harry read that letter over Neville's shoulder, not intending to, but Neville had opened it at breakfast with slightly shaking hands and Harry happened to be there. And he saw Neville read it twice and then fold it very carefully and put it in his breast pocket and sit up a little straighter. Harry said nothing. Sometimes nothing was the right thing. The third was that Voldemort made contact. Not directly, Harry didn't expect direct, that wasn't Voldemort's style, not at this stage, not when he was still building. What happened was a dream, except it wasn't exactly a dream and Harry knew the difference. He'd had the connection all year, flashes of corridor and something cold and purposeful behind an eye that wasn't his. He'd been managing it the way you manage a door that doesn't quite close. Not ignoring it, not opening it wider, just keeping it in view. But in January he woke at 2 in the morning with the taste of cold stone and a very clear impression of a circular room with spinning doors and something behind one of them that shone with a cold and horrible importance. He sat up in the dormitory dark. He breathed. He looked at his scar. He thought, "You're looking for the prophecy. You can't get to it without me, so you're trying to get to me." He thought, "That's not going to work the way you expect it to." He got up and went down to the common room and sat by the dying fire and thought about it for an hour with the clear patience of someone who is ahead of a situation and knows it. The vision wasn't accidental. Voldemort was pushing it, putting pressure through the connection deliberately, trying to produce in Harry either a reckless rescue response or, at minimum, enough emotional information to manipulate. He needed to close the connection, or at minimum understand it well enough to control what moved through it in both directions. He went to Snape. This was not a comfortable thing. Harry and Snape had a relationship built on 7 years of mutual loathing that had its roots in something older than either of them. The ghost of James Potter making every interaction a minefield. And asking Snape for help with something this personal and this important was the kind of thing that required setting aside everything he felt and focusing on what was necessary. He knocked on Snape's office door at 6 in the morning. Snape opened it in his sleeping robes, which was an experience, and looked at Harry with pure dislike. "Mr. Potter," he said, "it is 6 in the morning." "I know," Harry said. "I need to learn occlumency." A pause. "I beg your pardon." "I have a connection to Voldemort through my scar," Harry said. "He's been using it to push visions at me. I need to learn to control it. I know you're a skilled Legilimens and an occlumens. I know Dumbledore has probably already talked to you about this. I'm asking you directly." Snape looked at him for a long moment with eyes that were doing several complicated things at once. "Come in," he said finally. Harry came in. He sat down in the chair in front of Snape's desk. The office was cold and smelled of old potions ingredients and something sharper that was probably the disinfectant Snape used for accident cleanup. Harry was entirely comfortable in it. "What do you know about occlumency?" Snape said, settling behind his desk with his robes wrapped around him and his expression returned to its default mode of carefully maintained neutrality. "Mind-clearing practice," Harry said. "The goal is to create a blank surface for Legilimency to slide off rather than find purchase. The technique involves disciplined emotional suppression for most people." "For most people," Snape said. He looked at Harry very carefully. "And you believe you are not most people?" "I know I'm not," Harry said, "which is why I'm not sure standard occlumency is what I need. What I'm thinking is different. Instead of suppression, control. Instead of blanking the connection, managing what passes through it. He paused. If I can do that, I can stop him using me to get to the Department of Mysteries, and I might also be able to use the connection as intelligence. Carefully. Snape was very still. He was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry could not fully read and had never quite been able to read. Snape's face was the most controlled face he'd ever encountered, layers on layers, history on history. But something in the dark eyes was alive and focused in a way that was different from the usual performance of contempt. "You are more like your mother than I realized," Snape said quietly. It appeared to cost him something to say it. He picked up his wand. "We will try it your way," he said, "and if it doesn't work, we try mine." He looked at Harry. "I am going to attempt legilimency. You will attempt to control, not suppress. Are you ready?" "Yes," Harry said. Snape cast legilimens. What happened was nothing that either of them had quite prepared for. Snape entered Harry's mind the way a skilled legilimens always did, with a kind of precise force, a pushing of intention through the connection, and he found himself not in the expected landscape of memory and emotion, but standing metaphorically in something that felt like a storm. Not a chaotic storm, a present one. Lightning in the distance, organized and aware. Snape pushed further and the storm pushed back, not violently but with the calm authority of something that had decided where its edges were. Snape withdrew. He lowered his wand. He looked at Harry across the desk. "That is," he said after a moment, "not a mind I have encountered before." "Did it work?" Harry said. "What you call control," Snape said, "appears to be your natural state. The connection to the Dark Lord is present but contained. You have not suppressed it, you have simply made it small." He seemed to be revising something internally. "You did not learn this technique." "No," Harry said. "It is simply how your mind is now." "Apparently," Harry said. Snape was quiet for a moment. The morning light was starting to come through the high dungeon windows. "The connection will remain," Snape said at last. "But what you described, controlling the channel, is theoretically possible with what you have. You would need to practice deliberate projection, feeding the Dark Lord specific images rather than real ones, a kind of active deception rather than passive defense." "I know," Harry said. "I've been thinking about that. It is extraordinarily dangerous," Snape said. "If he suspects the deception, I know that too," Harry said. Snape looked at him for a long, complicated moment. Harry looked back, the same way he looked at everyone, openly, without aggression, without the particular flinching quality that had always made their interactions feel like bracing for impact. "Do not," Snape said finally in a voice stripped of all the usual layers, "do anything in the Department of Mysteries without telling someone first. Dumbledore, myself, anyone." He paused. "Your mother would have wanted me to say that." Harry held that carefully. "Thank you," he said. "I mean it." He left. He walked back up through the dungeons, and into the castle morning with the stone cold under his feet and the January light blue and thin through the windows. And he thought about what was coming, the Department of Mysteries, the confrontation that Voldemort was building toward, the Horcruxes that needed finding, the 22 people in a room who were getting better at defending themselves every week, the prophecy that said either must die at the hand of the other. He thought about the Horcrux inside himself. He thought about what Snape's legilimency had shown him, the storm of his own mind, organized and aware, and the small cold fragment that sat in it, increasingly uncomfortable like a match flame in a hurricane. He thought about Solomon's face in that chamber below the world, the old sadness in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Harry." He went to breakfast. Neville was already there, eating with characteristic focus and reading something that turned out to be, on second glance, a herbology paper that wasn't on any assigned curriculum. He looked up when Harry sat down. "You're up early," he said. "Busy morning," Harry said. Neville nodded, went back to his paper, then looked up again. "The next DA meeting," he said. "I've been thinking about teaching the modified impediment to the others properly. If that's all right, I think I can explain it." "It's your spell," Harry said. "Of course it's all right." Neville went slightly pink. "It's not really, Neville," Harry said. "It's your spell." Neville looked down at his paper, looked back up, said with quiet but complete conviction, "Okay, it's my spell." Harry poured himself a cup of tea and looked at the great hall filling up around him, the morning noise of it, the moving of owls and the arguing of Weasley twins and the clatter of plates and the particular smell of Hogwarts breakfast, and he felt the storm inside him warm and steady and patient, waiting for the spring. Chapter 5. The Storm That Walks. Spring came to Hogwarts the way it always did, reluctantly at first, then all at once, the grounds going from frozen gray to violently green in the space of a fortnight. The lake losing its ice in sheets that cracked and tilted in the March wind. The forbidden forest exhaling something that smelled like living things deciding to be alive again. Harry noticed it the way he noticed everything now. He was standing at the window of the 7th floor corridor, outside the room of requirement, watching the forest tree line shift in the wind when he felt the Horcrux move. Not physically, it didn't go anywhere. But something shifted in the quality of it. The cold fragment in his scar that had been quietly uncomfortable for months suddenly had attention on it, like something external had found it and was looking through it. Voldemort, thinking about Harry, specifically and with purpose. Harry held completely still, he breathed. He let the sensation be what it was without reacting to it, without pushing back or reaching toward it, just existing alongside it with the settled patience of someone who had been practicing exactly this for 4 months. He felt the attention move through him like cold water through a pipe, looking for something, looking for the emotional texture of fear or urgency or love, looking for a lever. He gave it nothing. The attention withdrew, the Horcrux settled. Harry breathed out. He was going to move soon. He could feel the shape of it the way you feel weather before it arrives, not prediction exactly, but sensitivity. Voldemort had been patient and deliberate all year, building in the shadows, organizing his Death Eaters, reclaiming territory, but the patience was fraying. Something had changed in the calculation. Harry thought about it and landed with Solomon's quiet clarity on the answer. Voldemort had heard about Harry. Not through ministry channels, not through Umbridge's reports, not through whatever Draco's father had been feeding him. Through something older than institutional intelligence. Someone who had been watching Hogwarts and paying attention and piecing it together from the evidence of a stopped hex in a courtyard, a shattered practice dummy, the particular way 22 students were beginning to move like people who expected to be in a real fight and weren't afraid of that. Voldemort understood that his timeline had changed. That the weapon he had counted on meeting at the end of some managed set of circumstances was not going to wait politely for the conditions to be perfect. He was going to act, and Harry was ready. The DA that evening had 31 members. 9 new ones had joined over the course of February and March. Word had spread the way it spreads when something is genuinely good, not through persuasion, but through people talking about what they'd experienced and other people wanting that thing. 2 Hufflepuffs, 3 Ravenclaws, 4 more Gryffindors. Harry had vetted each one through the simple mechanism of talking to them directly for 15 minutes, which with Solomon's clarity was more than sufficient to establish whether someone was there for the right reasons. He hadn't turned anyone away. Neville ran the first half of the session. He stood in the front of the room with a composure that would have been unrecognizable to the Neville Longbottom of first year. Not performed composure, not the effortful stillness of someone managing nerves, but the real thing, the settled presence of someone who has discovered they are genuinely good at something and has accepted that fact. He taught the modified impediment jinx with clarity and patience and a particular gift for identifying what was going wrong with someone's casting before they'd registered it themselves. Harry stood to the side and watched and felt something warm and simple in his chest. This was the point. Not Harry being powerful, that was a fact and useful, but it wasn't the point. The point was this: 22 people, now 31, standing in a room they'd made for themselves, learning to be capable together. The point was Neville Longbottom teaching a spell he'd invented. "You're smiling," Ginny said, appearing at his elbow. "I'm allowed," Harry said. "You look disgustingly satisfied," she said. "Also allowed," Harry said. She grinned at him and went back to the session. Harry watched her go and did not examine the particular quality of his attention because there was a time and a place for that kind of examination and this wasn't it. Luna appeared on his other side. "Something's coming," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Soon," she said. "Yes," she tilted her head. "Are you worried?" "No," Harry said. "Good," she said simply. "Remakes everything take longer." She drifted back toward the center of the room where she had in the past month become surprisingly lethal with a stunning spell, not because she was aggressive but because she was utterly, profoundly unintimidated by anything, which gave her spell casting a quality of pure intention unclouded by self-consciousness. The session ended. People filed out in 2s and 3s talking. Hermione stayed to help Harry rearrange the practice space. Ron stayed because he always stayed. Neville stayed because he wanted to go over what he'd taught and where it could be improved. A habit that Harry had been quietly delighted to watch develop. "The timing issue on the 3rd casting position," Neville said, reviewing his notes. "I think if I adjust if the wrist breaks slightly earlier in the arc." "Try it," Harry said. Neville tried it. The spell came out with a precision that was beyond anything Neville had been doing in September. He looked at the dummy, then at his wand, then at Harry. "That's better." "That's significantly better," Harry said. "I'm going to write it up tonight," Neville said. "All the variations for the others." "Good," Harry said. Ron watched Neville leave and then turned to Harry with an expression that was partly awed and partly amused. "You know he's going to be an Auror," Ron said. "Better Auror than half the qualified ones out there." "At minimum," Harry said. They walked back toward Gryffindor Tower and the castle was nighttime quiet around them, the torchlight steady, the portraits sleeping in their frames. Harry felt the castle's magic the way he always did now, the deep hum of it, the 1,000 years of accumulated protection, and he felt underneath it like a wrong chord in a familiar song, the new thing Umbridge had put there. The ministry enchantments, thin and surveillance-oriented, running through the walls like a second nervous system. He'd leave them alone. For now. They were Umbridge's eyes and ears, and they'd been showing her a school of students studying and practicing magic, which was true and not something she could do much about. Let her watch, it didn't matter. What mattered arrived at 2:17 in the morning. Harry was awake. He'd been awake since midnight, not because he couldn't sleep, but because his body had simply decided that tonight it needed to be present and alert, the way it sometimes did now, with an instinct that had proven reliable enough that he trusted it without question. He was sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark dormitory, Ron snoring softly 3 beds away, Neville's curtains drawn, Dean's Quidditch poster faintly luminous when the Horcrux screamed. Not audibly, it wasn't a sound. But Harry felt it like a struck bell, the cold fragment reverberating with something that was halfway between agony and alarm, and through the connection, the channel he'd spent 4 months learning to manage, came a flood of intention so loud and purposeful it was almost physical. Sirius, the Department of Mysteries. Now Harry sat completely still, he breathed. He looked at what had just arrived with Solomon's clarity, the way you look at a document you suspect has been tampered with and examine it for signs of editing. The vision was vivid. Sirius in a corridor of spinning doors on the floor hurt, the specific posture of someone who had been struck hard by a curse. The prophecy hall, the rows of glowing orbs, Voldemort's intention rolling off the scene like heat off tarmac, unmistakably present. Harry turned it over. He examined its edges. Too clear, he thought, too complete. Too perfectly calibrated to exactly the thing that would make me move fast without thinking. He got up. He dressed quietly and went downstairs to the common room. He sat in the armchair by the fire, unlit at this hour but warm still, and he thought. Voldemort had 2 problems with this plan. First, Harry knew it was a plan. Second, the people Voldemort expected to be Harry's support structure, the Order Dumbledore, were also presumably in motion. Which meant if Harry moved wrong, he moved alone into a prepared position against people who had been waiting for him. Harry was not afraid, but he was not stupid either. He went back upstairs and woke Ron. "Ron," he said quietly. Ron opened one eye. "I need you awake," Harry said. "Right now." Ron sat up. The eye that had been closed opened, and both of them focused with the specific sharpness of someone who has learned that when Harry Potter says "right now" in that tone of voice, the correct response is immediate and undiscussed alertness. "What's happening?" "Voldemort is trying to bait me to the Department of Mysteries," Harry said. "He's using a vision of Sirius. I don't think it's real, but I need to confirm Sirius is all right before I do anything else." Ron was already standing, reaching for his wand. "How do we confirm?" "Flew," Harry said. "Umbridge's office. She has the only connected fireplace in the school." Ron stared at him. "You're going to break into Umbridge's office." "We're going to break into Umbridge's office," Harry said. "Get Hermione." Hermione came with her hair alarming and her wand in her hand and her priorities organized in approximately 30 seconds. Harry explained in the corridor outside the dormitory. She listened, and when he finished she said, "We should bring Neville and Ginny and Luna." Harry hadn't been going to argue with that. "Already thinking it," he said. 6 of them moved through the castle at 2:30 in the morning with the practiced quietness of people who had been meeting in secret 3 times a week all year. Harry in front, Ron and Hermione close behind. Neville with his wand already out and his jaw set in the new way he had. Ginny moving with a precise silence that suggested she'd done this before. Luna in her pajamas with radishes still in her ears because apparently she slept in them, calm as a morning. Umbridge's office door had a locking charm that Harry undid in 4 seconds. The interior was pink and ghastly, and the fireplace was there. Harry knelt in front of it and threw in Floo powder and said Grimmauld Place and shoved his head into the green flame. The kitchen at Grimmauld Place resolved. Empty. The fire banked low. He called, "Sirius." A pause, footsteps. And then Sirius appeared in his dressing gown looking rumpled and alive and entirely uninjured, and the specific quality of relief Harry felt was not the panicked relief of someone who had been convinced of danger, but the confirmation of someone whose analysis had been right. "Harry," Sirius crouched down, staring through the fire with wide eyes. "What are you? It's 2 in the morning. You're all right," Harry said. "I'm fine. I was asleep. What?" "Voldemort sent me a vision. You were hurt. Department of Mysteries." Harry watched Sirius's face go from confused to alarmed to understanding. "I knew it was bait, but I needed to be sure." Sirius ran a hand through his hair. "I'm all right," he said. "Harry, if he's making moves, I know," Harry said. "Which means the real thing is happening somewhere else. He's not in the Department of Mysteries waiting for me. He's using the vision to move me while something else is actually in motion." He thought fast. "I need you to get Dumbledore, right now. Tell him Voldemort is active tonight and the Department of Mysteries vision was a feint, and ask him where his Order members are positioned." "On it," Sirius said immediately. He was already standing. "Harry, I'm fine," Harry said. "Go." He pulled his head out of the fire. Behind him, 5 people were watching him. He stood. "Not serious," Ron said. "Not serious," Harry confirmed. "Which means the vision is what I thought, bait. Something else is actually happening." "Then what do we do?" Neville said. Harry thought. He thought with the full weight of Solomon's wisdom applied to everything he knew, Voldemort's character, his strategy, his current position. The vision had been designed to move Harry to the Department of Mysteries. That was the stated goal. But if it was a feint, there were two possibilities. Either Voldemort expected Harry to see through it and had prepared a second layer, or Voldemort hadn't expected Harry to see through it and was now adjusting in real time. He felt the Horcrux. The fragment of Voldemort's soul inside him, involuntary passenger, connected to its original whether it liked it or not. Through it, very faintly, he felt surprise. Voldemort had expected Harry to move. Harry hadn't moved. And that surprise had leaked through the connection before Voldemort could close it. "He's coming here," Harry said. Silence. "Not alone," Harry continued. "Death Eaters. He's going to force the issue directly because the indirect approach isn't working." He looked at his 5 friends. "He's going to come to Hogwarts." "That's Hogwarts has protections," Hermione started. "That the Ministry has been putting holes in all year," Harry said. "Umbridge's enchantments, the ones running through the walls, they were surveillance first, but the same infrastructure that lets you watch a place also tells you where the protective wards are weakest." He felt ice-clear certainty move through him. "He's been using her all year without her knowing it. The High Inquisitor's monitoring spells mapped the castle's defenses for him." Hermione's expression was one of pure horrified comprehension. She had no idea. "No," Harry said. "She thought she was serving the Ministry. She was actually doing reconnaissance." He looked at all of them. "We need to move, not to hide, to position." Ron straightened. "Where?" "The entrance hall," Harry said. "Ground floor between wherever he's entering and the rest of the castle." He looked at each of them in turn. The 5 faces looking back at him were not afraid, not one of them. Neville with his jaw set, Ginny with her wand already in her hand, Hermione pale but steady, Ron with his chin up, Luna serenely present in her pajamas. "Listen," Harry said, "you don't have to come. Any of you, this is Harry," Ron said. "What? Stop being noble and walk," Ron said. Harry walked. They moved through the castle and Harry felt the night around them and felt the shift when it happened, a tremor in the castle's protective enchantments, not dramatic, not loud, but real and purposeful, like a thread pulled from a tapestry. 3 points. The north wing, the east courtyard, the gate near the Whomping Willow. 3 entry points simultaneous. He stopped at the top of the main staircase. Below him, the entrance hall was empty and cavernous, the great doors shut against the March night. He could see them in his mind's eye, the Death Eaters, moving through the gaps Umbridge's mapping had identified, dark-robed, masked, and somewhere among them, or arriving separately with the particular theatricality of a man who had decided he had waited long enough. Voldemort. "Positions," Harry said quietly. "Neville, Luna, the east corridor, cut off the exit toward the dungeons. If anyone comes through, hold them. Don't try to fight multiple Death Eaters at once, contain them." Ron, Hermione, west corridor, same instruction. "Ginny, with you," Ginny said. He looked at her. She looked back with the specific expression that meant this was not a request and she had already made her decision. "With me," Harry agreed. They split. Harry went to the entrance hall and stood in the middle of it, equidistant from the great doors and the staircase, and waited. Ginny positioned herself at the edge of the hall in the shadow of the staircase, wand ready. The great doors blew open. Not explosively, they swept wide with a deliberate force that was almost elegant. The way things move when someone powerful wants to make an entrance and has enough ability to make it effortless. Cold air flooded in, March cold, carrying the smell of the grounds and the forbidden forest and something else that was like ozone and burnt iron. 6 Death Eaters came in first. They moved in pairs, spreading to cover the hall, professional and practiced. Harry had seen aura formation work, and these people had a version of the same training applied to different ends. They wore robes and masks and moved with the focused purpose of people who had been briefed and knew what they were there for. None of them were looking at the boy standing in the middle of the entrance hall. Not at first. They were checking the room, the exits, the staircase. By the time they registered Harry, he'd already had 5 seconds to look at each of them. Then Voldemort walked through the door. He was not, Harry thought, what people expected when they imagined the most feared dark wizard in a century. He was not dramatically large. He was not physically imposing in the way that pure size or brutality was imposing. He was tall and very thin, and he moved with an absolute economy of motion, nothing wasted, nothing displayed that wasn't deliberate. His face was the face Harry had seen in the graveyard. White as birch bark, the flat snake-like nose, the red eyes that had the quality of something burning at low heat, continuously without fuel. The eyes found Harry immediately. They were very old eyes in a face that had made itself ageless, and they were intelligent. Harry had never underestimated that, had never made the comfortable mistake of believing that evil was stupid, and they were, for a moment, that Voldemort immediately controlled and suppressed, but not before Harry caught it, surprised. He had not expected Harry to be standing there waiting. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. His voice was quiet and carried the hall with the ease of something that had never once in its life needed to raise itself to be heard. "You did not come to me. No, Harry said. You saw through the vision. It was well made, Harry said. Serious at the right angle, the right level of distress, the right location. You did your homework. The problem is you used the connection both ways. When I didn't react the way you expected, I felt you recalibrate. That was enough. Voldemort regarded him, the red eyes moving over him with the focused intelligence of a mind doing rapid calculation, revising, incorporating the new data. You have changed, he said. The same thing everyone said, but from Voldemort it meant something different. Coming from those red eyes, it was less observation and more threat assessment. Yes, Harry said. What are you? Voldemort said. It wasn't a social question. It was the question of a predator encountering something that doesn't fit its taxonomy. I'm Harry Potter, Harry said. What I am on top of that isn't information that's going to help you. Voldemort's mouth curved, not warmly, the expression of a mind finding something useful in an unexpected corner. The Ministry believes you unstable, Dumbledore believes you manageable. He tilted his head, a motion that was very slightly serpentine. They are both wrong. They've been catching up all year, Harry said. Harry, Ginny said from her position, very quietly, just one word. Harry heard in it something's moving. He turned his head without taking his eyes off Voldemort, Mercury's awareness, the ability to hold multiple spatial positions in his attention simultaneously, and he clocked it. One of the Death Eaters at the edge of the hall, shifting, hand moving. The curse came fast. Green. The real one, the one you didn't block, the one that ended things, aimed at Ginny because whoever was casting had identified her as peripheral and unprotected and a useful source of leverage. Harry moved. Between one frame and the next, he was no longer in the center of the hall and no longer looking at Voldemort. He was between the curse and Ginny with his arm out, and the killing curse hit him in the chest and stopped. The flash of green light spread across him the way water spreads when it hits something solid, dispersing without purchase, finding no foothold, the Achilles' invulnerability expressing itself in terms that were completely insultingly absolute. Harry felt it the way you feel a gust of wind, present, noted, dismissed. The light vanished. The Death Eater stared. Harry looked at Ginny. She was unhurt, pressed against the wall, eyes wide but wand up. You good, he said. Fine, she said, and her voice was steady. Go. He turned back to the hall. Voldemort had not moved. The red eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that was beyond anger or calculation, something older than both, something that lived at the bottom of all the dark intelligence, something that Harry identified with crystalline accuracy as the first real fear Tom Riddle had felt in decades. Harry felt it through the connection, unmistakably. The cold fragment in his scar shook with it. That curse, Voldemort said very quietly, has never failed to kill. It failed tonight, Harry said. He called the lightning. He didn't shout it, didn't gesture dramatically, didn't perform it. He simply intended it, the way you intend to breathe, the way you intend to take a step, and the sky above Hogwarts answered through the stone ceiling as if the castle itself had become a conduit. And the lightning came down through the entrance hall in a bolt that went from the vaulted ceiling to the marble floor 30 feet from Voldemort, and the crack of it shook the windows in their frames and sent every torch in the hall blazing white. Not at Voldemort, not yet. A statement. The 6 Death Eaters scrambled. 2 of them dropped behind the stone banisters. 1 ran. 1 raised a shield charm that Harry could see, even from here, was nowhere near sufficient for what had just happened. The other 2 looked at each other and made the kind of rapid tactical assessment that resulted in them deciding that being elsewhere was a professional priority. Voldemort did not scramble. He stood in the entrance hall with his robes absolutely still and his wand in his hand. It had appeared from nowhere. Harry hadn't seen him draw it, and he looked at Harry with those burning red eyes, and the fear was still there, but it was working now, the way Voldemort's mind always worked, turning everything into something useful, fury into strategy, terror into calculation. Impressive, Voldemort said. Raw power, the lightning of heaven. He raised his wand. Let us see if it is enough. What followed was the fastest, most ferocious magical exchange Harry had ever experienced, and he'd been in 4 fights that qualified as genuinely dangerous in his lifetime. Voldemort was extraordinary. Harry had known this intellectually, and now he knew it physically, the way you know a river is powerful the moment you step into the current. His spellcasting was like watching architecture being built at speed, complex and interlocking, each spell preparing the ground for the next. The combinations so practiced they'd become instinct. He threw curses Harry had never encountered, some that had no counter because they'd been developed privately, some that bent around obstacles with homing intelligence, some that changed nature mid-flight. Harry moved. Mercury's speed took him out of the path of things that would have needed 3 trained aurors to dodge. He covered the hall in the time it took Voldemort to cast twice, closing distance, forcing the range tighter where Voldemort's architectural spell building needed space to work. He cast reductor curses that cracked the floor and the walls, and drove the remaining Death Eaters to cover. He cast stunners that hit with the force of Hercules behind them, connecting with one Death Eater who flew backward 10 feet and did not get up. And he called lightning again, this time not a statement. He directed it not with his wand because he didn't need his wand for this, he held it but he didn't use it. Zeus's power required nothing but intention, and a bolt struck the floor directly in front of Voldemort, close enough that the marble cracked and buckled and the shockwave knocked 2 Death Eaters off their feet. Voldemort deflected the edge of it. Not absorbed, deflected, which was itself remarkable, evidence of the extraordinary level of ability the man operated at. He turned the residual charge sideways into the stone wall and the wall exploded outward in a cloud of rock dust. And for a moment the hall was full of smoke and debris. Harry walked through the smoke without slowing. He found Voldemort by the door, the great doors that had swept open 20 seconds ago, though it felt both longer and shorter than that, and Voldemort turned and they were 5 feet from each other, and this close Harry could see the red eyes with full clarity, and what was in them was not composure. It was the face of Tom Riddle. Under all the architecture of Voldemort, the constructed persona, the cultivated terror, the deliberate mythology, it was the face of a boy who had grown up afraid of dying and had built a fortress around that fear so large he'd disappeared into it, and now something was standing 5 feet from him that the fortress had no answer for. "You can't kill me," Harry said, not gloating, just a fact delivered plainly the way all facts were best delivered. "Everything can be killed," Voldemort said. But his voice had changed, slightly. The absolute certainty of it had a tremor in it, very faint, the way a crack in a wall is faint until the wall comes down. "You've tried twice," Harry said. 15 years ago and 20 minutes ago, the answer was the same both times. He looked at him. "It's going to keep being the same answer." "You will make a mistake," Voldemort said. "Everyone does." "Probably," Harry said, "but you won't be alive to use it." He felt the Horcrux inside himself. The cold fragment, vibrating with proximity to its source, Voldemort was close enough that the piece of his soul inside Harry could feel the rest of his soul. The pieces scattered in objects across the country. The careful distributed immortality that was supposed to make him unkillable. Harry felt the whole network of it dimly but clearly, like feeling the roots of a tree through the ground above them. He thought about what Dumbledore had said. The piece must be destroyed if Voldemort is to be truly defeated. He thought about what he'd observed in the garden at Grimmauld Place, sitting still and looking inward. The fragment increasingly uncomfortable, like a match in a hurricane. He thought, not tonight, not while I don't know what happens to me when it goes, not without being certain, but soon. Voldemort made his choice in that moment. In the way that people make choices under conditions of genuine risk that they haven't encountered before, fast, instinctive, reversing prior commitment in favor of survival. He swept backward through the doors, a motion that incorporated the beginning of disapparition, and the 3 remaining Death Eaters followed, 2 of them dragging the one Harry had stunned, and in the space of 4 seconds the entrance hall was empty of everyone except Harry and the smoke and the cracked marble and the scorched ceiling. Harry stood in the middle of it. He breathed. He heard footsteps behind him. Ginny coming from her position. Then Hermione and Ron from the west corridor, Hermione with a long scorch on her sleeve and Ron moving with a careful favor for his left leg that suggested he'd taken a glancing hit from something. Then Neville and Luna from the east, Neville with blood from a cut above his eyebrow and his wand arm still raised and his eyes absolutely alight. Harry looked at all of them. "Anyone seriously hurt?" he said. "No," Hermione said. She was looking at his chest where the killing curse had hit. There was no mark, not even a scorch on his shirt. "Harry, he used the killing curse." "I know," Harry said. "At you." "I know, Hermione, and you're just standing there." "I tend to do that," Harry said. Ron made a sound that was part laugh and part something rower. "He ran," Ron said. "Voldemort, he ran." "He retreated," Harry said. "Tactically, he's not finished." He looked at the cracked floor, the blown-out wall section, the smoke still drifting. "But he's reassessing, significantly." Neville wiped the blood from his eyebrow with the back of his hand. "Are we what happened? In the east corridor 3 of them came through and he stopped. We held them," he said, and the way he said it was quiet, but there was something enormous in it. "Luna and I held 3 Death Eaters in a corridor. We didn't, none of us are badly hurt and they didn't get through." Luna nodded. "The modified impediment worked beautifully," she said. "Neville's version, 2 of them went into the wall quite solidly." Neville looked at his wand, then at Harry. "We did that," he said. "You did that," Harry said. The sound of running footsteps from the stairs above, teachers, order members who must have been alerted, the castle finally waking to what had happened in its entrance hall. Harry heard Dumbledore's voice, clear and rapid, and McGonagall's, and behind them others, and the great entrance doors at the top of the staircase into the school burst open, and they came pouring down. Dumbledore reached Harry first. He stopped at the edge of the ruined marble and looked at the hall, the lightning-scorched ceiling, the cracked floor, the demolished wall section, and then he looked at Harry standing in the middle of all of it, unhurt, with his 5 friends behind him. The headmaster was quiet for a long moment. Voldemort, he said. He's gone, Harry said. For now, he brought 6 Death Eaters. We held them, they've retreated. He paused. He tried the killing curse. Dumbledore looked at his chest. It didn't work, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet again. McGonagall came to stand beside him and surveyed the hall, and her expression was something Harry couldn't quite name, not shock, because he thought very little actually shocked Minerva McGonagall, but something more considered than that. Something that was taking stock of the situation and revising several large assumptions simultaneously. 5 students, McGonagall said, 6 Death Eaters, and Voldemort himself. We had good training, Ginny said from behind Harry. McGonagall looked at her. Then at Neville with his cut forehead, then at Luna who smiled, then at Ron and Hermione, then back at Harry. Her expression completed its revision process and landed somewhere that Harry thought, if he was reading it right, was something very close to proud. Right, she said with the efficiency of someone setting aside everything that wasn't immediately actionable. Poppy needs to see all of you now. We're fine, Ron said. Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said in the tone that ended conversations. Right, Ron said. Yes, Poppy. The hospital wing at 3 in the morning had the specific surreal quality of somewhere lit too brightly in a dark castle. Madame Pomfrey, moving with her quick professional assessment between the 6 of them, producing salves and potions and running diagnostic charms with the efficiency of someone who had patched up a lot of students over the years and had categorically stopped being surprised by the things Hogwarts produced. Ron's leg turned out to be a minor sprain from the edge of a blasting curse. Neville's forehead needed a Dittany application and 10 minutes. Hermione's sleeve was just the sleeve. Luna was entirely uninjured, which Madame Pomfrey checked 3 times because she didn't believe it. While Pomfrey was doing her rounds, Harry sat on the edge of a bed and thought about the Horcrux. He thought about what came next. The Horcruxes scattered across the country in objects he could identify with Dumbledore's memory collection and Solomon's clarity. Voldemort retreating tonight, reassessing, rebuilding his approach. The prophecy. The fragment of cold soul in his scar. Dumbledore came in. He closed the door quietly and crossed to where Harry was sitting, and did not pretend to have come for any other reason than to speak with him. He sat in the chair beside the bed, the visitor's chair, which was a small thing sitting in the visitor's chair, and he looked at Harry with blue eyes that were, for the first time Harry could remember, entirely unguarded. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. I need to start moving on them, Harry said. Fast, he's going to regroup and recalibrate, and the next approach won't look like this one. I agree, Dumbledore said. No qualification, no managed disclosure, just agreement. Harry looked at him. The locket is at Grimmauld Place, he said. Sirius said Creature had it. The ring you've already handled. The diary is gone. He paused. The cup, Bellatrix Lestrange. The snake, Voldemort keeps it close. Something of Ravenclaw's, Hogwarts, probably. Something he took when he came back to apply for the defense job the second time. He looked at Dumbledore. And me. Yes, Dumbledore said. And you. I've been thinking about that one, Harry said. When I look at it, the fragment, it's not stable anymore. It's been wrong in me since the transformation, like a key that doesn't fit the lock anymore. He looked at his own hands. I don't think I need to die to destroy it. I think the storm inside me is already doing something to it. Slowly. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was part hope and part the careful reluctance of someone who has been wrong about large things before and doesn't want to be wrong about this one. You believe it can be removed without? I believe it can, Harry said. I don't know it yet, but I'm going to find out. He met Dumbledore's eyes. What I know is that I'm not going into any situation with a plan that involves me dying as the acceptable outcome. That's not a plan I'm willing to execute. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't think I am willing to execute it either. He said it in the way things are said when they cost something. Not anymore. Harry breathed out. Okay, he said. Okay, Dumbledore said, and the word in his voice was different from how it had been before. It was a real agreement, not a managed one, not a strategic concession, but a genuine revision of position. It was the sound of a very old, very brilliant man accepting that the world was different from the one he'd planned for and deciding that different was not worse. We start with the locket, Harry said. Tomorrow. Well, he looked at the dark window. Today. Dumbledore nodded. He stood. He paused at the door and looked back with the expression he sometimes had, the one that Harry had decided was the most honest thing about him. Not the performance of wisdom, not the careful management of impression, but simply an old man who cared deeply about the people in his orbit and had not always known how to show that without turning it into strategy. Harry, he said, what you did tonight, all of you. He gestured slightly, taking in the whole hospital wing with its 5 other occupants in various stages of being fixed. This is what I should have been building from the beginning, not a weapon, a team. Harry looked around. Ron was arguing with Madame Pomfrey about whether his leg needed the sling. Hermione was making notes. Neville was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone quietly full of something large. Luna was humming to herself. We got there eventually, Harry said. Dumbledore left. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and listened to the sounds of the hospital wing at 3 in the morning. And outside the castle, the March wind moved across the grounds and over the lake, and the forbidden forest rustled and somewhere in the darkness. A long way from Hogwarts now, moving fast through the English night, Voldemort was alone with a new understanding. That the boy he had marked as an infant was not a weapon aimed at him, was not a symbol, was not a sacrifice in waiting or a pawn in someone else's game or a hero from a story where heroes were useful and disposable, was not afraid. The cold fragment in Harry's scar pulsed once faintly, and Harry felt it, smaller than it had been even last week. The storm inside him moving through it the way weather moves through everything, wearing down what was foreign, patient, and immense, and entirely at home. He thought about the year ahead, the Horcruxes, the rebuilding. The real confrontation, whenever it came, that would be different from tonight because everything would be settled by then, every piece in place, every life he cared about better defended. He thought about Neville teaching a spell he'd invented. He thought about Luna unafraid in a corridor against 3 Death Eaters. He thought about Ron saying stop being noble and walk. He thought about Hermione 4 weeks prepared. He thought about Ginny saying with me and meaning it without question. He thought about Sirius alive in Grimmauld Place, rumpled and safe. About McGonagall looking at the ruined entrance hall with something that landed near pride. About Dumbledore sitting in the visitor's chair. He thought about a chamber below a Surrey street and an old man in a throne made of storm clouds who had said the question is simply whether you want it. He had wanted it. He still did, not because it made things easy, not because it meant nothing could hurt him or scare him or cost him, but because it was real, it was his, and it was enough to make the difference in a world that had needed a difference made for a very long time. He lay down on the hospital bed without taking off his shoes and looked at the ceiling and felt the storm inside him, warm and vast and patient. And outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first gray of a March morning pressing up behind the mountains, and somewhere in that light was the next thing and the thing after that and all the days between now and the end of it. Harry Potter closed his eyes. The lightning inside him waited.